So guys, what if Naruto was sent to high school DxD for Marriage of Xenovia special movie? The sound of birds chirping filled the air. As the afternoon sun shined down on a vast field, the light of the sun illuminated the area, allowing for the damage to the field to be shown. The entire field was filled with slash marks that seemed to cover the entire area. While trees were sliced into pieces, but the cuts were incredibly clean and smooth, showing skill was very much a factor. Along with the cut trees, there were areas where entire parts of the ground were cut up, but only seemed to be in specific areas. Along with all the cuts in the area, there were craters everywhere, while there were also giant piles of rubble in random areas, where huge boulders once were. Now, they were just huge piles of pebbles and stones. All in all, it looked as if a major battle had happened, but in actuality, it was a training ground that had just been recently used. In this field was a young man, who was sitting on a stone that had been cleanly cut in half to provide a seat for the young man. He had fair, yet pale skin and white hair that was swept back completely and sapphire blue eyes that currently showed great focus. He was wearing a black coat that reached down to his feet and had neon blue serpentine patterns and designs, with the three coattails being ragged and tattered at the edges. He was also wearing a black, sleeveless zippered turtleneck beneath a midnight blue formal vest. He was also wearing charcoal gray, fingerless gloves, black pants, and dark teal boots with straps. Next to the young man was an O-katana that had an ornate bronze guard and a black scabbard with a dark blue cord tied to it. Laying next to the young man appeared to be a black panther with shiny black fur and red markings covering its body. This young man was currently on a quest to search for someone. He was currently reading through a thick, brown leather-bound journal. Before he pulled out a pen from inside his coat, and began to write notes inside the journal. He then put away the pen, before pulling out a picture that showed a young version of himself with his, once, spiky, blonde hair and a girl with red hair, amber eyes, and brown skin. He was wearing a pair of black shorts and navy blue t-shirt, while she was wearing a white shirt and a black skirt. The two of them could be seen hugging each other from the side while she had a wide grin and he was giving a simple smile. He looked at the photo for a little longer before looking up at the sky and thought, I am getting close. I just know it. I've narrowed it down to either Kyoto, Europe, or America. He then looked back at the photo before thinking, I will find you, Lupus, that's a promise. He was then broken from his thoughts when a small red magic circle appeared by his ear. He then narrowed his eyes in annoyance, causing the panther to wake up when he began answering, What is it? I was in the middle of something very important. The person on the other end spoke. Virgil then asked, What is this favor? The person spoke again, getting Virgil to frown in annoyance. Why should I go to Kuo? What is so important that you're sending me there? The person spoke again. Virgil now narrowed his eyes in greater annoyance, and his voice reflected this, when he asked, How does this concern me? Better question. Why should I care? The person didn't speak for a second, before asking Virgil something. If I do this for you, you are going to help me find someone, no questions asked, and you will promote me to king. That is my price. The person was quiet again, before they spoke, and then Virgil schooled his expression. Thank you, I will head there immediately. With that, the magic circle disappeared, and the young man stood up. Getting the panther to do so as well, closed the journal before tucking into his coat, then he picked up his sword. He then drew his sword before making two slash marks that left shining blue marks of energy, before they expended and created a portal of purple and black energy. He then walked inside with the panther, with the last thoughts on his mind being, I better not come to regret this. Searzex, and with that, the portal closed, leaving no trace that the young man and panther were there, except for all the damage that was done to the field. Kuo Academy, Occult Research Club building, 5 minutes ago. The city of Kuo is a place in Japan that has a rich martial arts history, but is most famous for its many ideas on the supernatural. Of course, only those connected to the supernatural know about this fact. Kuo Academy is also a school that is rich with tradition and was considered one of the top schools in Kuo. Kuo Academy, until recently, was an all-girls school, but has recently become co-ed, and also provides classes from elementary school, all the way through college. Currently, we focus on a different section of the school, where there appeared to be an old school building. Inside, the building was themed after the Victorian style, with chairs, tables, and couches all following the style. The shutters were open, allowing the room to be filled with light from the afternoon sun. This was the building of the Occult Research Club. Inside the main room were several people, however. These were not ordinary people, as they were not humans. They were devils. Among the people, there was a group of young people who wore the school uniform. And they consisted of 2 boys and 4 girls. The 2 boys appeared to be quite the opposites. with one being a blonde Bishonen with bluish-gray eyes. Meanwhile, the other boys seemed to be quite plain with brown hair and eyes. These were Kiba Yuto and Issei Hyoto, members of the Occult Research Club. As for the girls, they all were quite attractive in their own rights. The first was a young girl, with long blonde hair and green eyes, with C-cup breasts. The second girl was a girl who appeared to be quite small for her age, and she had white hair and brown eyes, with low B-cup breasts. The third girl had long black hair held up by an orange ribbon and violet eyes, with DD-cup breasts. The last girl had long crimson-red hair, blue-green eyes, and D-cup breasts. These were Asuya Argento, Kaneko Tuju, Akano Himahima, and Rias Grimori. This group were all a peerage, with Rias Grimori being their king. Another group appeared to consist of one adult-looking male and 15 young women. The young man appeared to be around 20 years old. With blonde hair and dark blue eyes, he was wearing a burgundy blazer with gold embroidery, a white dress shirt with the last button undone to show a bit of the male chest, and burgundy pants. However, he had an arrogant and lustful look on his face, while staring at Rias and the other female members of her peerage. This was Riser Phoenix, betrothed to Rias, and standing behind him were a group of women, clad in different styles of clothing, who were all a part of his peerage. Off to the side was a beautiful maid, with silver hair that was in 2 braids that reached down to her back and silver eyes. She also had red lipstick, silver eyes, and E-cup breasts. This was Graphia Lucifuge, queen of one of the 4 Mao of the underworld, and the strongest queen. Currently, however, she was monitoring the meeting taking place between Rias Grimori and Riser Phoenix. Things had devolved quite rapidly, as from the beginning, Riser had not cared for how Rias felt and was rubbing her leg while holding strands of hair and smelling her. Things got worse once her peerage entered, and her pawn, Issei Hyoto, entered and spoke out against Riser for who he was, even shouting in denial that he was her betrothed, since she could do better than him. Rias kept refusing to marry him, but was, eventually, put into a corner. Eventually, Riser called his own peerage, showing all 15 women, getting Issei to cry about how a bastard like him already has a harem. However, if one were to look closely, they would see half of these women did not look very happy. As things progressed, the tension got worse and worse between Rias and Riser. For the last time, I am not marrying you, Riser, Rias exclaimed. You and I both know that there's no way this marriage will be denied, my dear Rias, Riser stated, getting Rias to flinch, before he then continued, after all, our family lines are growing thin and a merging of the houses will be a great turning point for the future of us devils. Rias exclaimed, I still refuse. I will beat you in a rating game and free myself from this pact between our houses. Riser then replied, oh, but if you do that, then you would incur the wrath of my family. We wouldn't want that now, would we? Riser asked with a smug tone, getting Rias and her peerage to glare at him, except for Asia. Asia began getting his attention. Bucko-san wants to talk to you about this. Can't you find it in your heart to listen? Riser looked at Asia, before cackling loudly. He then looked at the Asia while wiping a tear, and said, it's adorable that you want to try so hard to help your king. But this is not a matter a resurrected devil should stick their unwanted attention in. Asia shrunk at his words, before she was completely frightened by the lustful look he directed at her, and he then cupped her chin, lifting her head to look at him and said, however, I may be inclined to listen if you were to service me. Riser then licked his lips and Asia began to completely shake out of fear. Issei then shouted, hey asshole, get your filthy hands off of Asia. Riser then sneered and glared at Issei before saying, how dare you address me like that? I will show you your place. Riser then snapped his fingers and exclaimed, Mira. Mira was a young girl with blue hair and brown eyes. She was wearing a white haori with a red obi, which is under a red happy coat. She wears bandages around her forearms and shins while also having guards on her shins. She also sported a pair of zori and a polearm as a weapon. Currently, Mira was charging at Issei, with her weapon ready to strike. Everyone watched as she was about to strike, when suddenly, her polearm fell apart into dozens of small pieces. This confused everyone. While Graphia was suspicious on what happened, before they all then felt a pulse of demonic energy that sent Mira flying back, until she hit the wall, where she fell unconscious. Everyone was now really confused, until they all felt a shift in energy. Before a portal of purple and black energy opened up. The 2 peerages were on guard, with Riser not caring. But Graphia, recognizing the technique, had wide eyes. Everyone watched as a sword began to appear out of the portal. Before it then showed a young man with white swept-back hair of about 511 walking out holding the hilt of the sword in his right hand, and the scabbard in his left. Once the young man was in plain view, Graphia went wide-eyed at who she was looking at. while Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko all felt like they knew who this was, but they couldn't remember where they met him. After he completely exited the portal, a black panther with shiny black fur and red markings followed before the portal closed. They watched as the young man surveyed his surroundings with cautious eyes, impressing Grafia, before he flicked his sword around, and then slowly sheathed it back into its scabbard. He then looked down at Mira with cold eyes that seemed to glow with power, before saying in a voice so cold, it made everyone shiver, some not for the same reason, I don't have time for weaklings such as this. He then looked back up and looked around before asking, in a tone that demanded respect, now, where is Rias Gremory? Rias was curious on why she felt like she knew this young man, and why he was asking for her. She was about to reply, but was cut off when Riser shouted, who the hell are you? What do you think you're doing interrupting an important meeting? Virgil turned towards him and looked at Riser as if he were mere prey before a predator, and only Grafia saw his hand twitch towards his sword, which she stopped by moving towards the young man. They watched as he turned towards Grafia, before the two looked at each other for a minute, and then Grafia bowed, and said, welcome back, Virgil, I trust you have been well these past 5 years? Once Grafia said his name, Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko all went wide-eyed at finally recognizing who this was, but everyone else was still confused on who this was. Virgil then nodded his head and replied, yes, I have, Grafia-sensei. This now shocked everyone, except Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, as they had no idea that the Grafia Lucifuge, the strongest queen, had a student. Riser, however, believed that this person was a weakling and should NT be here, and exclaimed, excuse me. But this meeting is between people of importance, so a weakling such as yourself has no right to be here. At these words, Grafia then began glaring at Riser, along with Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko, and was about to say something. But suddenly, an incredible amount of demonic energy was felt and everyone began to feel as if gravity was increasing. They all looked towards the source and found it to be Virgil, who currently had shadowed eyes, before he suddenly appeared before Riser and launched a punch into his stomach, causing a flash of light, before Riser was launched into the wall, with a severe wound on his stomach. Everyone looked and saw that Virgil was now sporting a set of gauntlets and greaves. The gauntlets and greaves were black in color, with the gauntlets resembling a wolf's head with fangs and mane, while the greaves looked like clawed legs. However, everyone grew incredibly uneasy at the light that seemed to flow through the veins of the gauntlets and greaves. Despite the uneasiness they were feeling from the light, everyone was quite impressed at their design and the speed that Virgil just exhibited. Everyone then heard a shout of pain, and looked towards Riser and saw that he was clutching his stomach in pain, before he shouted, I am not healing. Everyone was shocked by this as most knew about the Phoenix family's legendary healing abilities. Riser then glared at Virgil, who was still sporting the greaves and gauntlets, and exclaimed, what did you do to me? Virgil lifted his right gauntlet up to his face and calmly began to examine it, before he replied with a question of his own, holy light, is quite painful, isn't it? This question shocked everyone at someone owning a weapon that uses holy light. Even Grafia was shocked by this, as she never knew about such a weapon existing. But then she grew suspicious about how it was possible for a devil to wield such a weapon. Virgil then continued, you are currently experiencing pain, due to my attack cutting off your demonic power, and since you are of the Phoenix family, it is even more painful due to your body trying to heal itself. Think of it like a brick wall, a wall that will never break or wear, and you're trying to dig through it, with your bare hands. Everyone was dumbfounded at what the weapon actually did to Riser, as it not only caused damage, but sealed off his demonic power. Grafia then clapped her hands and said, all right, everyone, that is enough. Now since it has been decided, there will be a rating game between Rias and Riser. Grafia then turned to Virgil and asked, when will he be able to use his demonic power again, Virgil? Virgil answered as the gauntlets and greaves dispersed and his sword reappeared in his hand, he will regain his demonic power in 2 weeks, however, he will still be unable to move properly until he has fully healed, so, I recommend a total of 18 days before the rating game takes place. Grafia nodded her head and said, in that case, the rating game shall take place 18 days from today. With that, Riser and his peerage left, with half of his peerage members seemed to not want to go, which Virgil caught and with incredible speed, gave them a piece of paper without being noticed. Before they disappeared, after Riser's peerage was gone, everyone calmed down. Virgil then turned to Grafia and held his sword like a cane before he said, it is good to see you again, Grafia-sensei, I see you are still as beautiful as the day I left. Grafia smiled and said, thank you for the compliment. Virgil then asked, now, can someone tell me where Rias is? Rias then stepped forward and said, I am right here, Virgil-kun. Virgil looked towards her, and then everyone saw his eyes soften slightly and he said, in a polite tone, "It is good to see you again, Rias." At this, Rias began to tear up, before she launched herself into his arms and began to hug him while crying her heart out with tears of joy. Virgil braced himself when she launched into him, but then relaxed and hugged her back. After a minute of hugging, the two separated, but then Virgil felt a pair of soft breasts on his back while a pair of arms wrapped around him. He then heard a sultry voice whisper in his ear, Era, you've been gone for so long, Virgil-kun. I'll have to punish you for that." Virgil turned to see the one holding him was Akino, and she was currently smiling at him as she tried to mess with him. He then turned the tables on her. When he disappeared from her grip, she was confused on where he was until she felt herself get lifted up in a bridal carry. She turned to the one holding her to see Virgil looking right at her, causing her to flush in embarrassment. He then said in a polite tone, who knew that the ultimate sadist was weak to being attacked herself. Getting Akino to flush some more, getting Graphia and Rias to smile, while Rias giggled at Akino's embarrassment. Virgil then turned to Kaneko, seeing as she hadn't come up to greet him. He then put Akino down, getting her to pout, since she had wanted to embarrass him. Not the other way around. Virgil then moved towards Kaneko, who had been shaking with her eyes shadowed. She then saw a pair of boots enter her vision and looked up to see Virgil standing before her. The two looked at each other for a little bit before Virgil opened his arms, getting Kaneko's will to break down. She then launched herself into his arms and wrapped her arms and legs around him, while he also began to hug her. Everybody saw she was shaking and they listened to hear she was crying while whispering, "You're finally back," over and over again. Virgil then said, "Yes, I am back." After a while, Kaneko finally calmed down, and then Virgil put her down, before he looked to the three and said, "It is good to see you four again after all these years," he said with a polite and calm tone, getting the four to smile. Before they could say any more, Issei came over and asked, "Bucko, who's this guy?" At this, Rias remembered that she has to introduce her other peerage members to Virgil. Rias then turns and says, "Everyone, this is Virgil. He was actually one of the first friends I made along with Kaneko, Akino, and Sona." Rias then turned to Virgil and said, "Virgil-kun, these are my other peerage members, Kiba Yuto, my knight, Asia Argento, my bishop, and Issei Hyodo, my only pawn." Virgil looked at the three, before his gaze focused on Issei, and his eyes narrowed while beginning to glow. Everyone noticed this and were wondering what was going on, before Virgil's eyes stopped glowing, and he pointed at Kiba and Asia before saying, "These two have potential." He then gestured towards Issei, and said, "This one is trash." Issei took offense to this comment, and he got mad and summoned his sacred gear before grabbing Virgil by his coat. He then shouted, "Who the hell do you think you are to be calling me trash, huh?" Virgil then narrowed his eyes at Issei, before they started glowing again, and his grip tightened on his sword. The only ones to notice this action were Graphia, Akino, Rias, Kaneko, and Kiba, and they quickly tried to get Issei to let him go, but they were too late when Virgil disappeared from view. Virgil was then spotted behind Issei, slowly sheathing his sword, before they heard the ring of his sword being sheathed, and then Issei was covered in slash marks. Everyone was shocked when they saw that he wasn't bleeding, before Virgil turned and glared at Issei with his glowing eyes and said, "You should consider yourself lucky that you are a part of Rias' peerage, or I wouldn't have used the back of my blade." He then turned to Rias, eyes still glowing, and said, "You should have better control of your peerage, Rias. Otherwise, they very well may die on the battlefield." He then focused on Kiba, Kaneko, and Akino, before saying, "And stop coddling them in their issues, or else they will stagnate and fade." This got the three to freeze in shock, before he then said, "Fortunately, I am here to ensure that they have these issues beaten out of them." Rias stuttered out, What do YUM mean?" Virgil then turned to Rias and said, "As of this moment, I have been requested by your brother to be your trainer for the raiding game, since he noticed you have not trained, or attacked your peerage's issues head-on, like a certain Dampier I've heard about." At this Rias flinched, before his eyes stopped glowing. He then turned to Graphia and said, "Graphia-sensei, if you would come with me, we will be heading to Sirzex, where I will give the two of you some papers." Graphia nodded her head in understanding, before Virgil then looked back at Rias with glowing eyes and said, "You and the rest of your peerage shall train with me over the next 18 days, and I will be putting all of you through training so harsh, it will make my training under Graphia-sensei look easy." This got Rias, Akino, and Kaneko to look incredibly fearful, since they remembered all the tough training Graphia had put him under, from needing to dodge multiple spears of ice being launched at high speeds, to climbing an active volcano with a boulder tied to his back that was amplified by weight seals while lava was coming down. Virgil then turned around, drew his sword, and then slashed the air, opening a portal, that he and Graphia began to move towards. Before he entered the portal, he said one final thing. I will meet you at your family's villa in 3 days, Rias, as I have things to take care of first. He then turned and said, when I get there, you guys had better be training, or else I will make everything much harder, and to ensure that you all train accordingly, Shadow will be going with you. Rias was confused at the name, before she asked, who's Shadow? Rias then felt something metallic rub against her leg, and saw that it was the black and red panther that had appeared with Virgil, and she realized its fur was what felt metallic. Virgil then said, that is Shadow, and don't think he is just a simple panther. After all, Virgil then snapped his fingers, and Shadow tail extended. Before the end expanded and grew spikes, now resembling a flail, before it quickly whipped the tail at a chair, shattering the chair, and getting everyone, except Virgil and Graphia, to jump. Virgil then finished his sentence, he can cause just as much damage and pain as I could, if he wanted. With that, Virgil and Graphia entered the portal. Before it closed, then they were gone, leaving Rias and her peerage with Shadow, who was currently watching all of them intently. Rias, Aquino, and Kaneko then all thought the same thing, we are so screwed. With Virgil and Graphia, the two were currently walking out of a portal, into the office of a surprised Sears X Lucifer, who then gained a smile. Virgil, it is so good to see you again. I take it you've met with Rias already. Sears X exclaimed. However, he began sweating when he had to instantly use both hands to catch the strike of a sheathed sword, courtesy of an annoyed Virgil. Yes, I did. However, you seem to have forgotten to inform me about her betrothed being there as well, Virgil said, with his annoyance seeping through his voice. Sears X began sweating even more, and said in a nervous tone, well, I forgot. Virgil then began adding more pressure and said, I suggest that you don't forget anything again, Sears X, or I may just have to inform the wife of a certain Red Satan. At that, Sears X began paling out of fear, considering his wife had taken a liking to Virgil from when they met, when Virgil was still a child. Virgil then pulled away and then held his sword like a cane, with both of his hands resting on the top of the hilt. Sears X then relaxed, before he then cleared his throat and said, it is good to see you again, Virgil. How have you been these past 5 years? I've been well, and I was close to finding who I was looking for, but then I get a call from an annoyance asking me to assist his sister, in exchange for helping me in my search and for promoting me to a king, Virgil said, while aiming everything at Sears X, who at least had the decency to look sheepish. Well, you see, about that, Sears X began getting Virgil to look at him with narrowed eyes. I can help you with your search, but as for the promotion, that can only be done once your power and strength has been seen and acknowledged. You may have been trained by both me and Graphia, but unfortunately, due to this, nobody would take our word that you are strong enough, since it would be seen as bias. Virgil nodded before saying, I expected as such, since you have both trained me, it could be seen as teacher's pride. Very well, when the opportunity presents itself, I will show everyone my strength, as well as what I am. This last part was directed at Sears X, getting the Satan to get serious and nod his head, while Graphia then narrowed her eyes at that, but figured he would reveal everything when the time comes. Virgil then said, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, I would like to give you my applications into Kuo Academy's college courses. Virgil then pulled out a folder from his coat and handed it to Sears X, with the Red Satan taking the folder. Sears X then opened the folder with Graphia also going through it, and both noticed everything was in order, but there was something that they were curious about. Virgil, why do you have your name down as Naruto Uzumaki? That was the name my human mother gave me, before I found out that my other name was Virgil. Thanks to Yamato here, Virgil, be in order. You will start school in a month, and I am guessing you don't wish for Rias and the others to know. Virgil nodded and said, that is correct, as I feel it will be a nice surprise to see their reactions. Sears X nodded his head, agreeing with Virgil at how their reactions would be funny. Graphia then walked up and asked, when did your hair become white, Virgil? As I remember it being blonde and spiky when you were younger. Virgil reached up and gripped a couple strands and looked at them, before he placed them back and said, after I was reincarnated, it slowly began to turn white, but it only grew noticeable during the years I was gone, and when it became completely white, it all fell straight. However, I did not like having my hair in my face, so I swept it all back, where it has stayed by itself. Graphia nodded, accepting his answer. Then Virgil said, now, I must be off, as I have things to do, and people to meet before I join up with Rias and the others at the Gremory Villa. And with that, Virgil drew his sword, and slashed the air creating a portal, before walking through, with the portal closing after him. With Virgil, later, Virgil walked out of a portal in front of a mansion that had several flags everywhere that had a crest that resembled a phoenix. Recognizing the crest, Virgil knew that he had arrived at the Phoenix estate. Virgil then walked towards the gate with Yamato in hand, before he noticed an intercom to the side of the gate. He then walked over to the intercom and pressed the call button before he then waited. After a minute, he heard someone speak from the intercom. Yes, how may I help you? Virgil politely said, Hello, I would like to meet with the Lord and Lady Phoenix and their family, please. Do you have a meeting or an appointment? The person on the intercom asked. Virgil responded, No, I do not, but I believe they would like to meet the one who sealed their son's demonic power. At this, the gates opened up, and Virgil began to walk towards the estate. As he reached the door, it opened up to reveal a butler holding the door open. As he entered, he noticed, at the bottom of the main stairs, was the entire Phoenix family, excluding Riser and his peerage, no doubt still experiencing pain and trying to recover as much and quickly as possible. Virgil began walking forward, but stopped and thanked the butler, before he approached the Phoenix family. Once he was in front of them, he placed his hands on top of his sword and said, Greetings, my name is Virgil, and I would like to talk to you about something important. One of the men walked forward. He had blonde hair and a matching goatee, and blue eyes. He was also wearing a black suit, with a white dress shirt, and orange tie. This man then said, It is a pleasure to meet you, Virgil San. My name is Alexander Phoenix. This is my wife, Veronica, and these are my children, Ruvel and Ravel. Unfortunately, one of my children are busy and cannot be here, while the other is recovering from the wound you inflicted on him. Virgil nodded his head and said, It is all right. I can understand not being able to participate in certain events or gatherings due to various reasons. As for your other son, had he not spoken badly about those he doesn't know, then he wouldn't be suffering like he, no doubt, currently is. Alexander understood the hidden meaning. Had he not insulted me, I wouldn't have made him suffer, and nodded his head before he said, Come, let us all talk in my office. With that, Alexander and his family began walking up the stairs with Virgil walking next to all of them. As they walked, So, Virgil San, Ian noticed that sword in your hand. Are you a practitioner of the sword? Ravel stuttered out, since she was slightly afraid of the one who sealed her older brother's power. Virgil nodded and said, Yes, I am. I've been one since I was 7 years old, and continued ever since. His answer shocked Ravel, as well as Alexander and Veronica, at one training so young. Why did you begin training at such a young age? Veronica asked, her motherly instincts taking over. My parents were attacked by demons and stray devils. But even though I was hidden under the floorboards, I had a direct view as they were killed, Virgil said. Getting looks of shock, sadness, and sympathy from Alexander, Veronica, Ruvel, and Ravel, as they were attacking my parents. I found Yamato under the floorboards, and when I grabbed it, it taught me how to open my portals. However, since I was still young, I had no control of the technique, so I wound up in the underworld. But since I was also still inexperienced with the technique, the portal stayed open, and all the devils and demons entered as well. I saw them and began running as fast as I could, but they launched attacks at me. And so I was heavily injured. Eventually, I was found by Sirzex and he eliminated all of the demons and devils, before he began to approach me. However, since I was only a child and I had no knowledge on who he was, I attacked him, and managed a cut on his cheek, before I collapsed from all of my injuries. Later, I woke up, and found out that I had died, and he brought me back, by using a free night piece he had on hand. At this, the four of them had looks of shock and sympathy for Virgil's situation. Then Veronica said, I am sorry for bringing up bad memories for you, Virgil San. Ravel then said, and I am sorry for starting this by asking when you began practicing swordsmanship, Virgil San. Virgil gained a small smile, then calmly and politely responded, It's fine. There is no need for you to apologize for your curiosity. Ravel San, are you for your motherly instincts, Veronica San? This got the two to blush, with Veronica's being a light blush while she giggled into her hand. Ravel, on the other hand, grew crimson while her head literally burst into flames, getting her mother to giggle at her reaction. After a little bit, Ravel managed to finally calm down, before she then looked at Virgil and finally took notice of just how handsome he is. She also thought about how polite and gentlemanly he's been the entire time he was here, and couldn't help but gain some admiration towards him. Finally, they all made it to Alexander's office, and then they all took a seat, with Lord and Lady Phoenix sitting on a red, two-seater, Chesterfield sofa. Meanwhile, Ruvel sat on a red, wingback chair, with Ravel sitting on a red, bergère chair. Virgil sat opposite of Lord and Lady Phoenix, while he placed Yamato across his lap. So, Virgil San, what is it that you wish to speak with us about? Alexander asked. Virgil politely replied, I wish to know your thoughts on the arranged marriage between your son and Rias Gremory. Virgil's request surprised, not only Alexander and Veronica, but Ruvel and Ravel as well. Veronica politely began. Why are you interested in this topic? Virgil politely responded. I would like to know your thoughts on the marriage, because I would like to hear both sides and I have decided to hear your thoughts first. Rias has already been quite adamant about not wanting to marry Reiser, for obvious reasons. From what I've witnessed, your son is arrogant, insensitive, temperamental, disrespectful, and a womanizer. As Virgil described Reiser, Alexander and Veronica both kept flinching, while they, Rouvel, and Ravel all looked ashamed. Virgil then continued, these are some things I've noticed in your son, and to top it all off, is that your son doesn't look at Rias as a young woman, or even a person. Your son sees her as if she was an object to do with as he pleases, which is also another reason she does not want to marry him. Alexander and Veronica both nodded their heads in understanding, since they both knew that no one would want to marry someone like that, especially add on to the fact that Reiser doesn't see Rias as a person, and that makes everything so much worse. The two of them looked at each other and nodded before they turned back to Virgil. Alexander said, well, we aren't for this marriage either. Especially since everything you said about Reiser is true and we've noticed. This got Ravel and Rouvel to look at them in shock, before Alexander continued, this marriage was actually written up and forced by the Devil Elders, but they don't have what you'd call the best intentions. They have been around since the war between the old Satan faction and the anti-Satan faction, and they only do what they think is right, without thinking about anyone else. My wife and I have tried to get this marriage cancelled, but unfortunately, we couldn't do anything. Virgil narrowed his eyes, and asked, why could you not cancel the marriage? Veronica replied, we were told, that we continue to try and fight the marriage. They would make Reiser head of the Phoenix House, and then immediately have the wedding at the same time, so, we left it alone, but we also tried to talk to Xioticus and Venelana to get them to our side, since Venelana is also a Baal, and they are one of the most powerful houses, not even the Devil Elders would go against them, but Xioticus seemed all for the wedding. I even tried to talk to Venelana alone, but she didn't seem like herself. Virgil thought about what he just heard, before he focused on Veronica and asked, can you explain what you mean by, she didn't seem like herself? Veronica nodded and said, well, when we were younger. Venelana was just like Rias, and hated her arranged marriage with Xioticus. Her parents were a lot more forceful, and eventually, she just gave up and went along with her marriage to Xioticus. Then, when she first heard about the marriage, she came to me and told me that she wouldn't put her daughter through what she went through. She told me that she was going to talk to Xioticus about the marriage, but when I later spoke to her, she seemed to have just made a complete change in her decision. This may not seem strange, but trust me, if you knew Venelana like I do, then you would know that she doesn't just change her mind, especially if it is about something that she disagrees with. Virgil closed his eyes and lightly crossed his arms in thought, before he opened them, and said, you're right. That does sound strange, but as you also said, I do not know her like you do, so, I will just have to take your word for it, that something has indeed changed with Lady Gremory. With that, Virgil grabbed Yamato and stood up, then he said, thank you for your time today, I will take my leave now. And with that, the Phoenix family also stood and began to walk Virgil back to the door. However, as they were coming down the stairs, Ravel stepped on her dress and tripped, causing her to fall over the edge of the railing. Ravel's family were shocked by this and began to run down to try and catch her, while Ravel shut her eyes and awaited the pain from hitting the floor. Instead, she felt herself landing in someone's arms, and when she looked, she saw it was Virgil who had caught her. Are you all right, Ojou-chan? He asked, with a slightly raised eyebrow. Ravel began to blush heavily before she stuttered out, I am fine, Virgil-san. Virgil nodded his head, before he put Ravel down and held out his hand, catching Yamato as it fell from when he threw it earlier. Ravel's family finally made it over to them, where Rouvel, Veronica, and Alexander began to fret over Ravel and make sure she was okay. After they were sure she was fine, they turned back, to see the door open and figured Virgil had already walked outside. They all quickly followed to see Virgil just finish slashing the air to open a portal before he sheathed his sword back in its scabbard and began walking towards the portal. Ravel then ran up to him and said, wait. Virgil stopped just as he entered the portal and turned back towards Ravel, before he asked, was there something you needed? Ravel then replied, I just wanted to know, why did you help me? Virgil thought about it for a second before he then turned back with the portal beginning to close, but before it fully closed, he said, you needed help, that's all there was to it. And with that, the portal fully closed, leaving Ravel staring where he was once, with a blush and soft smile on her face, while she held her hands to her chest while she thought, thank you and I hope to see you again soon, Virgil-sama. 3 days later, Gremory Villa, after Virgil had left. Rias and the other packed up everything they needed before they all used a magic circle and arrived at the base of the hill where her family villa was located, with Shadow still very much with them. Once they had appeared at the area, they all began walking up the hill with everyone carrying a backpack. As they were walking, Issei kept complaining about how tired he was, but after nearly getting impaled by a spike, courtesy of Shadow, Issei hadn't complained since. Eventually, the group had made it, where they all first put everything away. Then they changed into their school P.E. uniforms. The uniforms consisted of a simple white t-shirt and a pair of blue shorts with white lines on the sides for the boys, while the girls had reddish-pink bloomers. Once they were all changed, they all went back outside and had decided to start by doing some warm-up exercises and stretches to get themselves limber. However, right when they were about to start, Shadow had come up and had papers in his mouth, before he dropped them in front of Rias. Rias, being curious about what the papers were, picked them up and found a letter addressed to her. So she began to read it. As she read the letter, she began to pale slightly. Until she got to the bottom, where she then sighed in relief. Akino and the rest were wondering what the papers were. And it had turned out that they were training regimens. Eating plans, stretches, and everything for each of them. When they were passed out, everyone tried to see what was planned for them. But they were greatly confused when they all saw nothing but their names on the papers. Seeing this, Rias double-checked the letter, and found that the real training would only appear once they were ready for it, or Virgil unlocked it for them. They then found another paper that listed a bunch of simple physical exercises, such as cardio, push-ups, sit-ups, and a few more to improve their physical strength, while also listing exercises for Asia, Rias, and Akino to improve on their magic. They also found weights to wear around their ankles and wrists in a magic circle at the bottom of the letter. They all put them on, before they suddenly felt the weights tighten. Before they all then hunched over, Kaneko included. They were all wondering what was going on, when a little note card appeared. And said how the weights automatically adjust to the wearer's limit. And cuts off all supernatural assistance, such as a rook's strength. The purpose was to increase their own natural strength and speed, so when they were magically enhanced, they would be even more powerful and have more speed in the end. The weights would then slowly increase so the wearer feels a slight difference as they slowly progress and get stronger. So with that, the group had set out to performing their training with the weights on, and Shadow still watching them. They also found out that Virgil had great respect for women. As seen when Shadow would guard the door and the wall to the girls' bathing area, something Issei found out the hard way, when he got flailed right back out the door, or right back over the wall, courtesy of Shadow's tail. The group would then prepare dinner according to the meal plan, and relax for an hour, before heading to bed, where Shadow would then roam the halls, like the predator he is, hoping for either an enemy to annihilate or Issei to flail. Shadow has really enjoyed flailing Issei, as seen when Shadow would stare at Issei intently with its tail ready for action. Anyways, currently, the group were inside having breakfast, which consisted of oatmeal with a plate of toast and jam and a cup of either orange juice or tea. The group were preparing for their day of training, when a familiar portal opened up to reveal Virgil walking out, sword in hand. When the portal closed, they all immediately moved towards him, but were shocked when Kaneko was suddenly at his side, hugging his arm. Virgil had no issue with this and simply let her be, before he then asked, "I trust you have all been training and adhering to the rules?" With his gaze focusing specifically on Issei. Rias stepped up and said, "Yup, we've been following the beginning training plan you set, and have been wearing the wrist and ankle weights as well." They all showed the weights around their wrists and ankles, getting Virgil to nod, before Rias said, "As for following the rules, we really didn't know any rules except follow the training. No peeping on the opposite gender or perverted actions," which the last two seemed oddly specific. Virgil nodded his head and replied, "Because those were the only rules I made, and those were specific for a reason," he finished, while staring directly at Issei, getting a tick mark from Issei. "What's that supposed to mean?" Issei exclaimed, while feeling very insulted, until everyone leveled a blank stare at him. At seeing everyone staring at him, Issei shrunk into the corner sulking. Virgil then shook his head and said, "Anyways, I am here now to further specialize your training to get rid of your weaknesses, as well as add on to your physical training." This got the group to perk up, as they were glad that they could now progress their training more. Akino then asked, "So, what are we going to be doing, Virgil-kun?" "Each of you will be doing different training, while some of you will also be doing the same training since it will be easier to help several of you at a time," Virgil said, getting the group to nod in understanding, while Issei was excited at possibly being able to see the girls in sweaty clothes that cling to their body, that is, until Virgil then said, "However, Issei will be doing something different from the rest of you, away from all of you." This sent Issei crashing down, while the rest of the group got confused. Why does the perv get special training? Kaneko asked, while glaring at the pawn, getting him to sulk even more. Because he is the weakest among you, even without training. You all at least have some form of training, power, or magical ability to back up on him. On the other hand, has nothing due to not only being new, but not receiving any form of training, which was supposed to be your king's job, Virgil said, getting Kaneko to glare at Rias. While she looked sheepish, Virgil then continued, now, because of this, I have to ensure that your weakest link can at least defend himself and all of you better. This got everyone to nod in understanding, before everyone leveled blank stares at Rias. Rias saw these looks and exclaimed, I am sorry, all right. I was just so focused on my life without needing to focus on my duties as the Gremory heiress, that I didn't think to train and got lazy. Rias ended, by falling to her knees and whispering. Rias thought they would all hate her, but she was surprised to feel a pair of arms wrap around her. And she looked up to it was Virgil holding her. He then said, Rias, nobody is blaming you for living how you wanted without worries, but you and your peerage could have also trained a little bit to keep in shape, or get better. So, don't worry, it was only a mistake, and mistakes happen to everyone, including myself. At the reveal that Virgil also used to make mistakes, everyone went wide-eyed and stared at Virgil, since they never would have expected that. Rias then asked, you mean, you've also made mistakes? Virgil nodded and replied, yes, but now is not the time for that. Right now, we have to get started, as there are only 2 weeks left of training, since I will be giving all of you the last day to rest and recover. With that, the group finished their breakfast before they all went outside. Once they went outside, Virgil stood in front of them and asked, now, do any of you know how much weight you're currently walking around with? The group all shook their heads, before Virgil then said, all of you lift up your right wrist weight. This confused the group, but they all complied and lifted their right arms to show the weights on their wrist. Virgil then waved his hand, and a projection appeared above each of their weights. Akino, Rias, and Kaneko all had 60, Kiba had 60, and Asia and Issei had 40. They were all confused what these numbers represented, and Asia was the one who asked, what are these numbers, Virgil-san? Virgil responded, these numbers are the amount of weight you all are currently carrying. This means that you and Issei are currently carrying 40 pounds. While the rest of you are carrying 60 pounds, this shocked the group at how much they were carrying without magic. Until Virgil continued, now, while it may seem like a good amount of weight, there are also seals on the weights to spread the amount all throughout your body. This purpose is so that it trains the entire body all at once, so that like this, your body grows at the same rate and lets you develop stronger, yet leaner muscles. This also allows you to train longer, since you will just be moving like you usually do, while the weight constantly grows as you get used to it. The group nodded their heads in understanding where Virgil was coming from. Virgil then cleared his throat, getting everyone's attention again. Now, I will be telling you all right now, that in the little time I have, I will try my hardest to make you as strong as possible. However, I cannot do this on my own. You all need to put in the work and effort to get stronger. Is that understood? Everyone got serious looks on their faces and said, hi. Virgil nodded his head and said, excellent. Now, all of you follow the usual routine for warming up while I go change into the proper attire. With that, Virgil went back inside to change, completely missing the mischievous looks on the faces of Rias, Kaneko, and Akino. Once Virgil went inside, the 3 of them quickly followed behind. They watched as he went up the stairs into a room. Before he closed the door, however, Virgil was unaware that the room he entered, the door has a tendency to not close, only appear closed. Moving as quietly as possible, the 3 moved over to the door, and then Rias lightly pushed it open with her finger. When they saw him, the 3 of them went wide-eyed. Currently, Virgil was dressed in a pair of black shorts that had royal blue chain designs around the right thigh and black and royal blue sneakers. While the 3 would admit that Virgil was incredibly handsome, what they went wide-eyed at was the scar that they could see on his chest. Right in the center of his chest, was a wide scar that seemed to represent something going through his chest. Then, when Virgil turned around, they saw a tattoo that covered a big chunk of his back. The tattoo looked like a sword with a ring with angel wing on the left side, and a devil wing on the right. Then they saw that the ring looked a little misshapen. That was when they realized the scar on his chest went all the way through to his back. They were broken from their thoughts when Virgil pulled his black t-shirt on and then grabbed Yamato and began moving towards the door. When they saw him moving, they immediately began moving as quickly and quietly as possible back outside to join the others. Virgil then finally made it outside and watched as the group all were doing their warm-ups. He then moved forward and cleared his throat, getting everyone to stop and move towards him. Before they stopped in front of him, Virgil noted how Rias Akino and Kaneko didn't seem to be as out of breath as the others. But just put it down as them getting used to the workout. Virgil then said, "All right, now, I will begin to tell each of you what you will be doing for training until I say otherwise." Everyone nodded, before Virgil then turned to Kaneko. "Kaneko, you will have your weights increased, while needing to dodge my attacks that I will be launching at you." Kaneko's already pale skin paled even more upon hearing that, but then Virgil continued, "Do not worry, I will slow down my attacks, since they are normally extremely fast, but it will still be fast enough to the point that it will prove a challenge." Kaneko calmed down and then nodded her head in understanding. Virgil then said, "We will also be working on some other things, but that we can do a little later, when we're further in your training." Virgil then turned to Kiba. "Kiba, you will also have your weights increased. And I will also be teaching you a proper sword style. Since you seem to be following a knight's path completely with your lack of a sword style." Kiba nodded, slightly ashamed at that last part, but understood it was his own fault. Virgil then looked to Asia, Rias, and Akino. "You three will also have your weights increased. But Asia not as much, considering she is still not as strong as you two. On top of that, I will be teaching the three of you different types martial arts." The three nodded, but Asia looked worried, until Virgil continued. "Asia, I will be teaching you a style that revolves around protecting yourself through blocking and redirecting. But it won't do much unless you also counterattack. I understand that you are a kind spirit and do not like violence. But unfortunately, future enemies will not take your feelings into consideration and will attack you. Or worse, those close to you. I am not saying you need to counterattack. But the least you can do is learn how to redirect an opponent's attack so they hurt themselves instead." Asia looked down for a minute, thinking about everything Virgil said, and realized that he was right. There have already been plenty of people who wanted to hurt and kill those around her, so the least she could do was at least learn to defend herself. Asia looked back at Virgil with more confidence and nodded her head. Seeing this, Virgil gained a small smile and nodded his head, glad that Asia understands the importance of defending oneself. When Virgil showed that small smile, Asia, Rias, Akino, and Kaneko all blushed at how handsome and kind he looked, while the latter three were all blushing since they hadn't seen him smile since they were kids. Asia was blushing due to how caring he was. She hadn't known him for long, but she knew his cold, hardened persona was just his way of protecting everyone, and that was always a very endearing trait to her. Virgil then said, "I will also be teaching the three of you how to use your magic and sacred gear in other ways than just the normal uses. Especially you two." Virgil gestured to Akino and Rias. Getting the two to pout, Virgil then continued, "You two go for either the most basic and simple of attacks, or the most wasteful attacks." Virgil then focused on Rias. "Rias, you have the Bile family's power of destruction, and yet you are weakening your own power because you only use it as a ball of energy before launching it." Rias looked down, knowing what he said was very true. Virgil then continued, "However, I will be showing you different ways to use your magic, as well as teaching you and Akino how to apply your magic to your martial arts." This garnered interested looks from the two, before Virgil then turned towards Akino. "As for you Akino, you have a tendency of using more attacks than necessary, causing you to have less magic when needed." Akino looked away, blushing in embarrassment, before Virgil then said, "Now there are two ways to fix this." Akino turned back towards him, wondering what the two methods were. Either you stop using all of these extra attacks, or you make sure you more magic and stamina in order to cast as many spells as you want. When Virgil finished, Akino looked at him in shock. At first, she was going to retort since she liked causing extra pain to her enemies, but when Virgil said about having that much magic, she grew excited at the possibilities with such an amount. Akino then gained a determined smile and nodded her head, ready for whatever training Virgil had planned for her. "Hey! What about me, huh?" an impatient Issei shouted. Virgil then turned to Issei and had a hardened look, before saying, "I was just about to start with you, and had been planning on taking it a little easier on you. But since you seem to want to start, I guess I won't have to take it easy on you." Issei then began to pale at this, since he was still pissed about being called trash. He let his temper get the best of him, and now he was going to pay the price. Virgil then said, "Originally, I was going to increase your weights just a little bit. But now I am going to increase them to where each weight is going to be 50 pounds. Increase the gravity you feel times 5, and teach you a martial arts style, before working on your evasion speed by launching attacks at you. However, unlike with Kaneko, I will not be slowing down the speed of my attack. And just so you can see how fast my attack is," Virgil then turned and faced a tree, before 4 glowing blue swords appeared in the air, and then Virgil launched them. To the group, it looked like a line of blue, but to Issei, he just saw a flash and the swords were gone. When they all looked at the tree, they saw perfect holes going all the way through 4 trees, getting Issei to pale to an extreme, and Kaneko to sigh in relief at having it easier. Virgil then turned back and said, "Now then, let's begin," and with that, training started for the group, and while they didn't know how strong they would get, they did know one thing. Never piss Virgil off. I swear I gave you anything and everything, normal speech. Every little piece of me, normal thoughts, but all you did was look away, powerful being, sacred gear speech. When I said, I've had enough, I am moving on, past speech. You said your love was never lost, powerful being, sacred gear thoughts. Disclaimer. I do not own Naruto, High School DxD, or the Devil May Cry series, except for either products I've bought, or Devil May Cry 5, which I've recently bought. Chapter 2 Further Training, and A Devil's Past, Phoenix Estate, the night after Virgil left. Currently, we find ourselves in the Phoenix Estate, more specifically. In the bedroom of one, Ravel Phoenix. Ravel was in her room. Wearing a pink frilly nightdress, as she was preparing for bed, Ravel began thinking about the meeting with Virgil, how kind and polite he was, and when he caught her from falling, she didn't know why, but every time she thought about Virgil, she would begin feeling extremely hot in her chest, she would begin panting and her face would flush. She was suddenly broken from her thoughts, when she heard her bedroom door open, to reveal her mother. "May I come in, Ravel?" Veronica asked. Ravel smiled and nodded her head while replying, "Of course, mother." Veronica entered the room and closed the door, before she walked over to Ravel and grabbed the brush from Ravel's drawer, before she asked, "Do you mind if I brush your hair, like I used to do?" Ravel smiled brightly and nodded her head, before she said, "Of course, mother, you haven't brushed my hair in quite a while." With that, Veronica gained a smile and moved behind Ravel before she began to gently brush Ravel's hair. Veronica remembered how she used to brush her daughter's hair all the time when she was younger before they abruptly stopped for some reason. She shook her head. Now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. Veronica decided to relax and enjoy her time with her daughter. So, Veronica began, "What are you so deep in thought about?" This caused Ravel to blush deeply. "Nothing. Nothing at all," Ravel exclaimed, hoping that her mother wouldn't find out she was thinking about a certain white-haired, stoic devil. Veronica gains a Cheshire cat smile and leaned eye to Ravel, feeling the heat her daughter's body was emitting. "Would it happen to be connected to Virgil?" Veronica asked. Ravel's head burst into flames and smoke before she nodded. Veronica hummed, feeling hot in the chest, panting, and a flush face. "You wouldn't happen to be feeling or going through any of these, would you?" "Yes, mother, whenever I think about Virgil-san, I always begin panting, my face feels flush, I feel incredibly hot in my chest, and then lately, I've also felt that same heat in the lower half of my body," Ravel informed with a blush, getting Veronica to stop brushing her daughter's hair. Ravel then turned towards her mother with a cute, meek look with a blush on her face and asked, "What's happening to me, mother?" Veronica's eyes were wide and she was looking at her daughter for a second, before she smiled softly and continued brushing Ravel's hair. Veronica then said, "Well, Ravel, that feeling you just described is actually something I thought would happen later in your life." Ravel turned to her mother with a confused look and her mother continued, "What is currently happening, is that you had something happen that comes from our connection to the creature we are named after, and it is called a soul connection. This is something that happens when we come into contact with the one that we are destined to be together with, for the rest of our lives." Ravel looked down in embarrassment, not knowing what to make of this information that she just found out. Ravel looked at her mother with an embarrassed look and asked, "So, what should I do, mother? I don't know what to do with these feelings I have." Veronica smiled softly at Ravel, before she put down the brush and gently hugged her daughter, before she said, "Well, start by learning about him, his likes, dislikes, and such, and then try and use that knowledge to get closer to him. For example, if he likes eating delicious food, learn to cook delicious food and use that to get closer to him. Simple things like that go a long way than big gestures." With that, Veronica let go of her daughter and wished her good night before she left and turned off the light to the room. With only her lamp still on, Ravel sat on her bed, thinking about her mother's words, and realizing how little she actually knew about Virgil, other than his name, and a few other details. With that, Ravel turned off her lamp and began to lie down in bed, thinking about how she can find out more about Virgil. Present day, Gremory Villa, back with the Gremory Peerage. It has been 5 days since Virgil rejoined the group. And we find everyone is doing different, unorthodox exercises that they didn't find too difficult. But at the same time, not very easy either. Rias, Aquino and Asia were concentrating on spheres of their magic, changing the shape of them and adding details, and they had to keep this up for at least an hour and a half. It sounded relatively easy to Rias and Aquino, but when they began, they found it was actually harder than they thought. Asia didn't find it too difficult to change the shape, but it was harder for her to keep the sphere going for a long period of time since she hadn't had much training in the practical use of magic other than healing. As for Rias and Aquino, they could summon the magic for the amount of time. But their issue was that they couldn't really change the shape. This problem came from their lack of control, which was told to them by Virgil. The two of them had a tendency to either charge up and fire their magic in large but slow attacks, like Rias, or waste magic in multiple weaker attacks, like Aquino. Virgil then explained to the three of them the reason for this training. The purpose of this training was to increase the amount of magic one has if they have a low amount, or increase control if they have a large amount of magic. While Rias and Asia were accepting of the training, Aquino was a little reluctant about this, because she wanted to work on getting more magic power already. However, when Virgil explained that having more control decreases the amount of magic used in spells, she was then okay with the training, since less magic needed meant more magic for spells. As this was happening, they would then alternate with Virgil teaching the three of them martial arts like he said. Rias and Aquino received their training together, since they didn't have an issue when it came to being on the offensive, like Asia. However, instead of being an issue, it worked out better, since Asia would then be able to receive some more direct training and advice from Virgil. Asia, while she may not like fighting and causing harm, was glad that Virgil understood that and took his time with her. While Asia enjoyed these training sessions, she also grew slightly confused, since there were times where Virgil seemed very familiar for some reason. Asia didn't know why he seemed familiar, but she figured he would say something either if they knew each other, or when he was ready. For Kaniko's training, it was just like Virgil said. He began training her to increase her agility by launching his magic swords at her. He also slowed down their speed just enough so that she needs to put in effort to dodge. But they won't hurt her as long as she pays attention. Her set goal is to be able to dodge them at half their original speed for an hour. After her evasion training, her and Virgil would train in martial arts with her method being he fights against her, and she learns the style during her evasions, blocks, counters, and attacks. While it wasn't the most normal method to learn a style, she had to admit that it was very effective for her, since she tended to learn through actions more than watching or reading. When it was also just the two of them, Virgil would act more like when he was a kid and smiled a bit more and was more relaxed with her. He even played a few games with her, or let her sit in his lap while he pet her head. This was something she dearly missed as he did it all the time when they were younger, until he left. With Kiba, true to Virgil's observation, Kiba did not train in a sword style, despite being able to make any type of blade he wanted with his sacred gear. Sword birth. Currently, Kiba was being taught a sword style that focused on quick movements and attacks, as well as high reaction speed. It was basically a weaker version of his Dark Slayer style. But it seemed to fit Kiba perfectly since Virgil explained that the style requires the user to train out of their tunnel vision, so he could keep his ideals of a knight and still fight properly. At first, Kiba found the training to be difficult, since he had to have his weights increased a tremendous amount that pushed him past his limits. But when taken off, he found himself to be faster, but gained a severe case of tunnel vision. Virgil would then tell Kiba that he has to train with immense weights before taking them off in order to acclimate to the new speed and prevent tunnel vision from happening, and that he has to do this repeatedly in order to get rid of his tunnel vision at higher speeds. Finally, there was Issei, who found out that Virgil wasn't joking when he said that he wasn't going to take it easy on him. Virgil did exactly as he said he would and amped up Issei's weights to 50 pounds each before increasing gravity on Issei by 5. Issei felt like he was going to be crushed under the weight. At least that was until Rias asked Virgil to take it easier on him during training. Issei thought he was saved until Rias added that he could punish Issei after training however he wanted. Virgil thought about this and nodded, before he then turned to Issei and decreased the weights but left the gravity increased. Issei was asking why he didn't undo the gravity, and Virgil told him that he would be able to train less but under an increased amount of gravity and he would be able to get stronger. Issei was still skeptical about the training, so Virgil had to explain it in ways that would get the pervert to accept the training. With great reluctance, Virgil explained how if Issei trained and became stronger, he would be able to peep on women as much as he liked, and not get caught due to his increased speed. After hearing this, Issei was greatly determined to proceed with the training, but he didn't see Virgil pull out a paper that had a seal on it with a mischievous smile on his face. Virgil only said that part to motivate the perv. He wasn't actually going to let Issei use that speed among the humans, but he would find great entertainment when he next saw the perv get beaten by the fabled, righteous feminine fury. What? Just because he was strict and rarely lenient didn't mean he didn't want to have some form of entertainment himself, even if at the expense of the perverted pawn. This training went on for a couple days and everyone could feel that they were indeed getting stronger. They were all grateful to Virgil for taking the time to train them, when they know that even though he was asked to do this by Searsex, he wouldn't have cared and could have just ignored Searsex. Currently, it was day 8 of training, and they all had made great increases in their skills, but now it was time for some of them to tackle their issues. Currently, Virgil was with Kaneko and the two of them were sparring with Virgil being on the offensive and Kaneko being on the defensive. Originally, Kaneko had a hard time dodging and blocking Virgil's attacks, but now, she could feel her dodges became smoother, and her blocking more effective. She knew that she was doing well, but she also knew that he was still holding back a lot of strength and power, but she knew better than to think he was holding back without reason. After all, he made it very clear to all of them, that arrogance was one of the quickest ways to be defeated and either captured or killed. The two of them continued to spar for a few more minutes before they finally stopped with Kaneko panting heavily and Virgil didn't even look out of breath. They both then relaxed and sat in the shade of some trees with Kaneko sitting in his lap with her leaning into his chest while he rubbed her head as she let her ears and tail out. She had missed him greatly and she felt incredibly comfortable around him, so she didn't mind, especially since, when he was petting her, it made her feel even better. Kaneko then thought of something. "Hey Naruto." Naruto looked down at Kaneko and answered, "Yes Kaneko, is something wrong?" Kaneko shook her head and said, "Nothing's wrong, but I wanted to know, why do you seem to be two different people at times?" Naruto stopped petting her head, much to her displeasure, and asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, when you first came back, you were cold and stoic, and then when it's just the two of us, you're much warmer, calmer and nicer, so, I was just wondering what that was all about," Kaneko said, hoping to get an explanation. "Well, I don't really remember why or how it happened. All I know is that after I was saved by Searsex, I felt something was different but I couldn't place it. After a while, I realized that the different feeling I had was that I seemed to be able to flip a switch in a sense and this allowed me to train harder and become a better warrior," Naruto explained, but upon seeing Kaneko's confused look, he continued, "Let me put it this way, after whatever happened to me, I became able to turn off my emotions and thus, I become stoic and cold. That's the reason it seems like I am two different people at times, because my, Virgil, persona is cold, while my regular self is warm and I am trying to get to how I used to be, since I've kept my emotions off for the most part these past 5 years." Kaneko was wide-eyed at this information, since she didn't know that would be the reason for why he seems to be two people at times, but what really caused her shock was that he had kept his emotions off for most of the time that he was gone. She then turned to face him, and gave him a hug, making Naruto stiffen up, before he awkwardly hugged her back. When Kaneko felt him stiffen up at the hug, she immediately realized that he was in a lot worse condition than she thought. Okay, this came out of nowhere, Naruto thought as he rubbed Kaneko's back, getting her to purr. After a minute of the two of them hugging, Naruto separated, cleared his throat and said, "Well, now that the atmosphere is a little lighter, maybe now we can try and get you to work on using chakra again, what do you say?" At this, Kaneko paled, as she was still very afraid of losing control like her Nei-san. Kuroka, Naruto clearly felt her fears, as he pets her head, getting her to look up at him, and said, "Hey, calm down, alright, we're not gonna work on having you use senjutsu yet, just chakra, and I'll be right here with you, but you need to realize that if you don't begin accepting and training in your heritage again, it's going to hurt, not only yourself, but those around you as well. You see, while I was away, I found out that if a Nekomata were to not use their chakra or senjutsu, it stunts their physical growth." Kaneko looked at her own body at this. "That does seem to be an issue I don't like." Naruto nodded but then he said, "But if it is a Nekosho, like you," this got Kaneko's attention again, as she wanted to know what happens. They suffer the physical growth stunt, but along with that, they lose the ability to have children. This caused Kaneko to go wide-eyed, as she didn't know that her choosing to not use senjutsu would cause her to lose her dream of having a family in the future. She had liked Naruto since they were kids, since he was the only one to get her to smile and she had hoped to one day have a family with him when they were older. Now however, she was beginning to have doubts on that dream. She was then broken from her thoughts when Naruto continued talking. Also, if they somehow do get pregnant, and they go through the full 9 months, then they, along with the child die, since their body won't have the strength to handle the stress of pregnancy. Kaneko was staring down and held her hands against her lower abdomen, thinking about how her choices have damaged her dreams of the future. She then looked back up at Naruto with no small amount of fear in her eyes and asked, "Why does this happen?" Naruto shrugged his arms, before he held her close again and said, "From what I learned, senjutsu and chakra is supposed to always flow through your body and be used naturally. Like breathing or eating, however, when a nekosho stops using chakra and senjutsu, it acts the same as not eating anymore, and begins to weaken your body continually over time. You were still young and didn't have much time to get used chakra and senjutsu as much, so you didn't feel the effects as badly, but you still stopped using them. As such, your body stopped growing and it shut down your ability to have kids because your body subconsciously knew that if you were to have kids when your body is in the state it is, you and the child would have died." Kaneko was in shock at how much her decision affected her and her future. But before she could get deeper into her thought and sadness, Naruto continued talking. "Luckily, the solution to this problem is just to begin using chakra and senjutsu again. Now, I know you have your fears of senjutsu due to your sister, but from what I learned, senjutsu doesn't actually cause a person to go mad with power. You stay in complete control of yourself when you have some mastery of senjutsu, but if you have no training or practice, you die due to not being able to handle the power. So, this now brings up the question, if your sister didn't die from senjutsu, then why did she kill her king before fleeing?" This got Kaneko to think on how if what Naruto was saying was true, then that would mean that there was a reason why her sister did what she did. Kaneko was also happy to hear that there was a way to fix her problem, but she was hesitant to begin using chakra again. She was still scared about using chakra, but she knew that Naruto would be there to help her, no matter what happens. She began to calm down before she then looked to Naruto with a determined look and said, "Thank you for this information, and I've decided that the next time I see my sister, I'll give her a chance." This got Naruto to smile, before he smirked when Kaneko then asked, "Now, when do we start?" With her own little smirk present on her face. Time skip. It was currently dinner and right now everyone was in the villa having dinner, though Naruto could be seen with his eyebrow twitching like crazy. The reason? The cheat day he gave them for today to have what they want. They decided on steak and potatoes, and while he had no issue with this, they went overboard and made far too much. However, he didn't say anything, since he said they could have what they wanted and they decided on steak and potatoes. It started with all of them, sans Naruto and Shadow assisting in preparing some of the potatoes by using magic to peel them. He did find some intrigue in watching them all use magic to peel the potatoes as a form of magic control training, that is, until Issei went overboard and began to peel the potatoes like crazy, causing a mess, and peeling more potatoes than they needed. At first, they were all wondering what to do with the extra potatoes, until Naruto told them all to just use what they need, and he will also make something as a snack for the next day using the extras. After that whole fiasco, everyone was at the table eating their food and relaxing while enjoying themselves. They all just enjoyed themselves and ate, while Kaneko and Naruto continued to talk and enjoy each other's company. Much to Rias and Akino's jealousy, after everyone was done, they began talking about. Kaneko said, "Hey, Naruto." This confused the group on who she was referring to until they heard Virgil answer with a kind smile, "Yes, Kaneko? What is that you're reading?" Kaneko asked, while leaning over slightly to see what he was reading. Causing her small bust to rub against his arm, Rias and Akino were even more jealous at this, but their curiosity won over as they along with the others wanted to know as well. Everyone then looked to see he was reading from a thin book that had a classic style cover with the most identifiable feature being a stylized V in the center. A.N. The journal V is constantly reading from in Devil May Cry 5. Naruto closed the book, before he said, "It's a custom-made Bible that I had specially made to have this cover." This greatly shocked everyone as they all knew that devils couldn't read the Bible without suffering painful headaches, while Asia looked a little saddened. On top of that, there was still the fact that he could wield a weapon that uses holy light and not get injured. Rias and Akino then abruptly stood up before exclaiming, "That's it." Everyone but Naruto, Shadow, and Kaneko jumped in surprise, wondering what was wrong with them before the two of them directed glares at Naruto. They both then said, "Wielding a weapon that uses holy light and not being injured. Being able to read the Bible. We have so many questions, and you're going to give us answers." Naruto just sighed, and gently closed his book, before placing it on the table and directing his attention towards the two girls and said, "All right, what is it that you want to know?" Rias was the first one to ask a question. "First off, why did Kaneko call you Naruto just now? I thought your name was Virgil?" Naruto nodded his head and said, "She called me Naruto because my real name is Naruto Uzumaki. Virgil is the name I use when on business and the one I've used these past 5 years so that I couldn't be traced back to the Gremory family. Why I chose that name specifically is because Yamato told me and it's what I asked Sirzex to tell you. Besides, Kaneko was the only one to ask me if my name was Virgil, so I told her my real name. Rias frowned as she nodded her head, before Kiba asked, I just noticed this, but why do you seem nicer now than when you first came back? Naruto was about to answer, but Kaneko beat him to it. The reason for that is because he is able to turn off his emotions and he becomes cold and stoic, which is when he is in his, Virgil, persona. Right now, he is his regular, Naruto, self, and he has his emotions on. Naruto nodded his head, before adding, Kaneko is correct, and the reason I do this is because when I am using my, Virgil, persona, I become a cold warrior who will not hesitate to strike his target. This persona is very useful for training, stray devil extermination, and other missions. Everyone nodded, before Asia then asked, I wanted to know how it was possible for you to read the B Bible. Since as far as I know, devils can't read from the Bible. Naruto nodded his head, before he said, well, that is very true, but I am a special case, and I will reveal this eventually. Just know that due to my circumstances, I don't suffer the weaknesses that regular devils suffer, like the Bible, holy light, and holy water, etc. This is also the reason why I am able to wield the weapon you all saw me use against Riser that uses holy light. Everyone nodded in understanding, but still wished they knew why he didn't have these weaknesses. Next, Issei asked, hey, so from what I've heard, you've been gone for about 5 years now, right? Naruto nodded his head and said, yes, that is correct. I knew all of them, since I was 7, before I left at 13 years old, and have been gone for these past 5 years. Why? Issei then asked, well, I wanted to know what was so important that you've been gone for 5 years? The whole room grew silent, as everyone, mainly Akino, Kaneko, and Rias, wanted to know what he was doing for the past 5 years. They all looked towards Naruto, where he then looked back at all of them before he sighed and then pulled out a thick, brown, leather-bound journal that had pieces of paper sticking out here and there and placed it on the table. He then opened it and pulled out the picture he had of himself when he was younger and the red-haired, dark-skinned girl. Everyone was wondering who the two kids were, except Rias, Akino and Kaneko, since they already knew that the boy was Naruto when he was younger. Naruto then pointed at the girl and said, I have been looking for this girl for the past 5 years. As she was a friend of mine that I knew before I met Rias' brother, I wanted to come back to the human world to look for her, but I knew that I wouldn't stand a chance against stray devils, fallen angels, and other enemies who would want to cause me harm, so I decided to train under the tutelage of Grafia-sensei and Sirzex-sensei until they deemed that I was at a suitable level of strength to defend myself before I left. After that, I went back to Italy, which is where I met her when my dad was on a business trip there, and began my search. During this time, I continued searching for her while continuing my training and helping all the different factions and pantheons with any problems they had. I had managed to finally narrow the possible locations she could be to. Kyoto, somewhere in Europe focusing around Italy, and America focusing around Florida. When I got a call from Sirzex asking me for a favor, he then explained how his little Rias Rias blushing in embarrassment, was meeting her ass of a fiancé and would most likely end up in a raiding game and would need training. I agreed, under the conditions that he helps me in my search for my friend, and he make me a king. However, I found out that while Sirzex can help me in my search, I will need to prove myself to become a king. At this, Rias felt sad and began tearing up that one of her childhood friends needed to add conditions in order to help her. Naruto looked at Rias and saw the tears in her eyes and knew she probably was thinking he didn't care for her. He decided to nip this in the bud and said, Rias, I hope you know that I didn't add those conditions as incentive to come help you. This got Rias to snap her head to him with wide eyes. Before he continued, I added both of those conditions for a reason. The first one was so that I wouldn't have to be away from you guys anymore, because now, with your brother helping me in my search, I don't have to spend all my time searching for her, so now, I don't have to be away anymore, and if I am a king, then I will have some more freedom to do as I please. Rias thought about his reasoning, and realized Naruto was right, and that he wasn't actually being selfish, but was thinking about Kaneko, Akino, and herself. Rias then smiled and said, thank you for explaining that, Naruto. I was afraid that the only reason you came back and began training us was because you would get something out of it. I completely forgot that you wouldn't ask for anything unless there was a reason behind it. Everyone smiled to see their king was happy again. Then Akino decided to ask a question. Naruto, I wanted to know if you could also teach us aerial combat? Naruto thought about it for a second before he nodded his head and said, yeah, in fact, tomorrow, I'll give you guys a break from your workouts, so we can focus on aerial combat tomorrow. Then, if you still want to continue doing your workouts, you can do that as well. This got everyone to smile and get excited before Kaneko decided to ask to question Naruto. This got everyone to look at Kaneko to see what she was going to say. Why were you looking for this girl for so long? This question made everyone look towards Naruto, as they wanted to know the answer as well, especially Rias and Akino, since they wanted to know what made this girl so special that it took away their childhood friend from them, who was also the one they both liked. Naruto looked at Kaneko, then he looked around to see he was the center of attention and knew he wouldn't be able to get out of this one. He took a deep breath and said, I've been searching for her because she's my childhood friend, as well as the first one I fell in love with, and so that we can fulfill our promise of getting married together. This made Kaneko, Rias and Akino extremely jealous. Realizing that this girl has a massive head start in the competition for Naruto's heart. However, despite the massive lead she has, they also know that she has been out of his life for most of his life. This gives them a chance to also claim a spot in his heart, and they don't care if they have to share. They would rather share than not be with him at all. With that, everyone finished their food before they then relaxed for a little bit, then headed to bed, ready to start the next part of their training. The next morning, Rias and Akino got up extra early to get ready before they began waking everyone up, while letting Naruto get his extra sleep before they woke him up. As the two were waking everyone up, they realized that Kaneko wasn't in her room. This confused everyone, as they all began wondering where she could be. Until Rias and Akino had a thought that made them very jealous. They immediately rushed to Naruto's room, with Asia, Kiba, and Issei following behind until they reached Naruto's room. Once there, Rias and Akino kicked the door open, to find Naruto was still asleep with Kaneko, who was wearing a pair of light blue short shorts and a big, white t-shirt that she stole, from Naruto the previous night, holding onto his side. What they all noticed, with Rias feeling especially jealous about, was that Kaneko had her ears and tail out while her tail was slightly curled and her ears were twitching. The reason for Rias' current jealousy is because of two reasons. The first reason is because Kaneko was laying in the same bed as Naruto was, and Rias had wanted to do that but didn't want to push her luck. The second reason is because she had been trying to get Kaneko to show her Neko features for years, but had been shot down every time, and then all of a sudden, a week of training with Naruto and she feels comfortable enough to reveal them. They were about to move into the room, when Naruto began stirring awake. Before he then sat up and rubbed his eyes, he then tilted his head to the sides and cracked his neck loudly, getting flinches from Asia and Issei. Before he sighed in relief while rubbing his neck. He was currently wearing a pair of royal blue shorts with black flame designs on the bottom and a simple white t-shirt. He then felt like he was being stared at, and turned to see everyone else was standing in his doorway. Looking at him, he then felt something holding his side and looked down to see Kaneko holding onto him and was still asleep. He lightly smiled and then began petting Kaneko's head, getting Rias, Akino and Issei to feel extremely jealous. Rias and Akino because they wanted to have their heads pet by Naruto, while Issei was jealous at Naruto for being able to wake up in the same bed with a girl. Kaneko, it's time to get up. Kaneko began to smile and purr, before she began to stir as well, signified by her ears twitching and tail swaying. She then stretched like an actual cat, with her tail extending out like a cat's, before she sat up and yawned cutely while rubbing her eyes. She then looked around before seeing a smiling Naruto, before he pointed behind her, and she turned to see everyone else. As soon as she saw the rest of their group, she immediately hid her Neko features again. What are you guys looking at? Kaneko asked, while looking at them with an expressionless face that would have had more of an effect, if it wasn't for the blush on her cheeks. Rias was the first one to snap out of her stupor, when she then asked, what are you doing in Naruto's room, Kaneko? Kaneko replied, I was sleeping. What did it look like? Rias blushed and began sputtering, getting Akino to look at her in amusement before she said, Era, was Bucko thinking naughty thoughts about little Kaneko and Naruto? This got Rias to become completely crimson like her hair, before she began to glare at Akino and shouted, no I wasn't. Everyone began to laugh at the two, while Kaneko had a little smirk before they all heard some soft chuckling and looked to see that it was Naruto who was laughing. The sight of his smiling face, and the sound of his laughter made the girls of the group blush, with Rias turning more crimson, which should have been impossible, at how handsome he looked and how he sounded when he was laughing. After a minute, Naruto stopped laughing before he smiled kindly towards them and said, thank you for that. I haven't laughed like that in so long. I was actually beginning to think I didn't know how to laugh anymore. Everyone smiled to see that he was happy and laughing, and they all decided that they liked it when he was smiling and was kind more than when he was cold and stoic. With that, Naruto got up and said, alright. I will now be going to prepare for today's lesson in aerial combat, and I suggest you all wear some warm clothing because it'll be kinda cold when we start, since we'll be flying the entire time if you guys can. With that, Naruto got up and went to shower before he got dressed while Issei, Kiba, and Asia left to get ready as well, leaving Akino, Rias, and Kaneko alone together. The three then looked at each other with Akino and Rias staring at Kaneko with jealous looks and Kaneko looking back with a smug smirk. Rias then asked, "What do you think you're doing, Kaneko?" "I have no idea what you mean, bucko," Kaneko said innocently, but her eyes and smug smirk said otherwise. Akino then asked, "We mean, why were you in bed with Naruto-kun? You have your own room right next to Asia's." Kaneko then smugly said, "That may be true, but I was so tired from training with Naruto-kun yesterday that I had passed out, but since he didn't know which was my room so he simply placed me in his bed and had planned on sleeping elsewhere, at least, until I seemingly clutched his arm in my sleep." This got the two to fume, as they realized that Kaneko had faked passing out from exhaustion. As well as, using Naruto's lack of knowledge on the rooms to get him to take her to his room and then played the arm clutch card to get him to stay. They were about to say something until Kaneko then added, "Besides, with boob monsters like you two, and this childhood friend he's in love with, I have to play a little dirty in order to secure a spot in his heart. I don't care if I have to share with this girl, but I will get to be with Naruto-kun." This shocked the king and queen duo at how much Kaneko cared for Naruto that she would play tricks to get herself a place in his heart. However, after the two thought about it, they realized that Kaneko was right and that she probably held the biggest disadvantage, unless Naruto was into lowly-like women. This thought got the two to shiver in fear at that being a possibility, but then the second sentence registered in their heads, and they realized that while it wouldn't be completely ideal, it would always be better to be a part of Naruto's life and have a place in his heart than to have neither. "You're right, Kaneko, it would be better to have a place in Naruto's heart, and while it may not be ideal, it is better to share him and have him care for us as well than to not have him at all," Rias said, completely agreeing with Kaneko, but then she added, "However, playing tricks like this is not the right way to go about it. Imagine if he found out that you had faked it and was hurt by this, you will have lost his trust and any chance to be with him." Kaneko suddenly gained a fearful expression at this, as she hadn't thought about what would happen if he learned that she had been playing tricks to get closer to him. She didn't want to think about what would happen if he suddenly stopped trusting and caring for her. Even thinking about that possibility brought tears to her eyes, as she didn't want to lose her chance to be with the one she likes just after he returned. Kaneko then gained a regretful look and said, "I am sorry." Kaneko then began to cry as she didn't realize what could happen if she were to use tricks to gain his affection. She then felt two pairs of arms wrap around her and looked to see Rias and Akino were holding her while smiling softly at her. Akino then said, "Shish, it's okay Kaneko. We understand that between the three of us, you probably have the biggest disadvantage in terms of your body and you feel threatened by Rias and me, as well as this unknown childhood friend of Naruto-kun's that already has a leg up on us since she knew him as a kid, so, because of that, it would be better if we worked together rather than against." This got the other two to nod in agreement before they all left the room, with Rias and Akino heading down to eat and Kaneko was going to her room to change and get ready before heading down for breakfast. Once everyone came down to prepare breakfast, they were surprised to see Naruto sitting at the table drinking some tea while the table was covered in breakfast food items. They saw eggs of 3 types, scrambled, fried, and over easy. A choice of pancakes or waffles, sausages, bacon, country-style hash browns, and beautifully cooked, golden brown potatoes. They saw maple syrup for the pancakes and waffles, while there was also a bottle of whipped cream and chocolate syrup and a bowl of assorted fruits and berries around the pancakes and waffles for them to decorate their food. There were also 3 pots that had the labels, coffee, sweet tea, and hot chocolate. Everyone was wondering how in the world he managed to do all of this and get ready before they came down. When they all saw him leave his room to get ready, they saw he had indeed gotten ready with a fresh change of clothes and a shower as well. If the few droplets of water in his spiked back hair were anything to go by. They all then sat down with Kaneko to the right of Naruto and Rias to his left while Akino sat directly across from Naruto. Once everyone was seated, they all began to politely fill their plates with the food of their choosing while they saw that Naruto only had a small meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and the hash browns. Once everyone was halfway through with their meals, Naruto cleared his throat, gaining everyone's attention before he began speaking. "Now then, before we begin training for today, we should also begin talking about strategies for us for during the raiding game," Naruto said, before he pulled out a thin binder that was full of papers. Everyone was confused by that statement and Rias decided to bring it up. Naruto-kun. What do you mean by us? You won't be able to participate in the raiding game with us since you aren't a part of my peerage." Naruto then chuckled and said, "While it may be true that I am not a part of your peerage, I am actually what is known as a free knight. and I am loosely tied to Sirzex-sensei due to him being the one to reincarnate me. However, because I am so loosely tied to him, I have the unique ability to temporarily join another person's peerage as a knight, if I so choose. For example, if your cousin Cyraorg were to request me to take the place of one of his knights, due to them getting injured, I could, also, say if someone has both knights, they can choose one to replace with me and I can fight in the raiding game, but I also have the ability to refuse to help someone if I think they don't deserve it. In a sense, think of me as the underworld's first, universal knight. At this, the entire group's jaws dropped as they now realized just how lucky they were. They had thought he would only be able to train them and talk about strategies involving only themselves, but to hear that he could also join in the raiding game was an incredible stroke of luck. They all grew excited about the possibilities and the fact that they would really defeat Riser now. Now hold on, Naruto said, getting everyone to look at him. Now before you go all, we can defeat Riser now. I need to tell you that while it is possible for me to join you guys, it is only possible if I get teleported with you to the arena. If I am not there, then I will be unable to join you guys. Now, I will do my best to be there, but if I am not there, that most likely means that something has come up and I can't make it, or something has prevented me from joining you guys. So, on the day of the match, do not assume that I am not there simply because I tricked or abandoned you, alright? After that, everyone calmed down, realizing that what he was saying was true. There could be many reasons why he may not be able to be there, such as a sudden mission from Sirzex, or something, but they knew what he was saying was true. With that, everyone was calm once again and looked towards Naruto, getting him to nod his head. Naruto then said, anyways, this binder has many strategies that all depend on you guys and how far you get in your training, or if I am unable to join. So, we'll spend some time right now during breakfast to go over strategies and then we'll all head out for aerial training. After that, everyone spent the morning eating the delicious breakfast and talking about all the strategies that Naruto had made for them. They were quite surprised at all the different scenarios he came up with and how they could react with and without him. After breakfast and strategies, they all went outside wearing long-sleeved shirts and sweatpants, with Naruto being the only to wear sweatpants and a regular t-shirt. Alright, Naruto addressed and everyone stood straight and paid attention. Now, today, we'll be focusing on your flying speed, maneuverability, and your ability to fight against an opponent in close combat while flying. So, everyone bring out your wings and then head up into the air until you're all just above the tree line. With that, everyone brought out their wings and began to fly up to above the trees around them, which was a good 20 maybe 30 feet in the air. Naruto watched as everyone was having an easy time getting up there, with only Issei and Asia having issues due to not really flying much and not practicing. Naruto walked over to the two, gaining their attention and asked, want to know an easier way to start flying, you two? At this the two of them nodded, with Asia blushing cutely while he was at it. Naruto then said, well, why not picture something you want or someone you want to meet at the level where everyone else is at and then try flying towards it. At this, Issei immediately took off with a shout of, oh pie. This got head shakes from the rest of the group, while Naruto's sweat dropped and Shadow, who was lying in the shade of a tree, turned his tail into its flail form, but made it slightly bigger and added spikes. Asia then looked up and she saw an image of someone in a brown cloak extending their hand towards her, revealing their pale, cracked skin and royal blue sleeve. As soon as Asia imagined this, she began to fly up as well with a little difficulty, but nothing she couldn't handle and finally managed to reach everyone else. Once everyone was at the requested height, they looked to where Naruto was and saw him looking at them before he nodded his head. He then rolled his shoulders and crouched down. They didn't know what to expect, but they most certainly did not expect him to just suddenly vanish. They looked around until Kaneko sensed something coming at them and looked up to see Naruto diving towards them at high speeds. Kaneko shouted, he's up there. This got everyone to look at him, and when they got ready to move out of the way, he disappeared again in a burst of speed before he reappeared right in front of them and stayed there. This gave everyone a chance to see that he was indeed flying, but what really caught their attention were his wings. Instead of the regular black leather wings coming out of his lower back, he had two pairs of light gray, almost white, scaled wings, with the webbing being royal blue in color, and seemed to also be reflective as with each movement they would see symbols and marks appear. He also had what looked to be sharp, praying mantis-like hooks on the bend of all four wings, with one pair of wings coming from his lower back and the other coming from his upper back in between his shoulder blades. Virgil's Devil Trigger wings from Devil May Cry 5. Everyone was in awe of his wings, and this was also further proof that Naruto was indeed different from regular devils. They had never heard of a devil having such amazing looking wings, or even having a different set of wings altogether. They kept looking at Naruto's wings until he cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. Now, today, like you know, will be focused on aerial combat, or in layman's terms, fighting in the air, Naruto said, with the last part being directed right at Issei. Naruto then continued, now, we will focus on your guys' ability to fly, your speed, maneuverability, and then finally combat. Now, Issei and Asia, you two are the ones who are the weakest in terms of flying. But that is only because you're new to being devils and have not had much need to fly, Naruto quickly explained when he saw Asia begin to drop her head in sadness. So, I will be personally working with you two on your flight, while I assign exercises for everyone else. This got the rest of the peerage to pale, until Naruto raised his hand and said, now, don't be like that, the exercises will be fairly easy, as one of them you may even have fun with. Hearing they would have fun with an exercise gained their attention, as they wanted to know what they would be doing. Naruto, seeing they were excited, smiled and said, now one of the exercises you'll do is just simple races against each other while you have your gravity increased, so you'll be experiencing 3x Earth's gravity. You can set any distance you guys want and can make bets against each other before I make a race for you guys later. And whoever wins can then ask me for anything they want. And I will give it to you, so long as it's not something illegal or could possibly hurt the other factions or someone else. Hearing the prize for the final race got Rias, Akino, and Kaneko pumped, while Kiba was just excited about maybe getting a chance to study Naruto's sword. As it intrigued him, Naruto then continued, now, that will be for today. And we can do other minor exercises while doing your regular workouts. Like lifting weights with your wings to make them stronger can make you faster thanks to your wings getting used to lifting some weight. All the exercises right now are easy ones and are just meant to help with your speed and wing strength. Well, work on maneuverability later in your guys' training before hopefully getting some time to train in actual combat while flying. Everyone nodded their heads in understanding, before Naruto then said, now, you all go do your races, while I help these two. With that, everyone except Issei, Asia and Naruto flew away to do their races, while the three stayed behind. Naruto then turned to the last two and said, now, Issei, said boy paid attention instantly, you need to get used to flying more and you seem to have a slightly better hang of it than Asia. So I want you to try flying as fast as you can through the forest, while dodging the trees to help yourself get used to flying, alright? Issei nodded his head before he took off through the trees. Naruto then turned to look at Asia, but then blinked when he saw her getting lower to the ground until she was on ground and then fell to her knees, heavily panting as she wasn't used to flying, and even then, she also didn't have much in terms of stamina. She was still panting when she heard someone stop in front of her and looked up to see Naruto looking at her with concern before reached down with his right hand with his sword in his other hand and asked, are you alright? Asia gasped as when she saw this action, she had a flashback to before when she was still part of the church. Flashback. Asia was walking through Italy heading to a nearby orphanage to help heal some children who had gotten sick. When she tripped over a crack in the road and fell, scraping knee and arm in the process, she began to sit up when she flinched and looked to see that the skirt to her outfit had torn when she fell, revealing her scraped knee, and her elbow had been scrapped too. She sighed as since she was the holder of the sacred gear, Twilight Healing, she couldn't heal herself, or at least not yet, as she hasn't had much training with it yet. She tried to get up only to flinch and fell back on her butt. Due to the pain she felt in her knee and elbow, she looked around to try and see if someone could help her, but the street was currently empty as no one was up yet, since she had left very early in the morning to surprise the kids. She was about to try again when she heard some snickering coming from a nearby alley and looked to see a bunch of men coming out of the alleyway, leering at her with perverted looks. Look what we have here, boys, a little nun who can't get up, said the apparent leader of the group. The group of men began to snicker and chuckle pervertedly, while another guy said, don't worry, sweetheart, we'll take good care of you. This got perverted laughs from the guys before they began to advance on Asia as she began tearing up in fear of what would happen. Asia began to back away from the group and was saying, please, don't do this. The group of men ignored her and continued to advance towards her, while some began to lick their lips. Asia was extremely scared at the moment and then closed her eyes while covering her head, hoping it was just a bad dream. However, Asia suddenly heard one of the guys say, who the hell are you? Before she then heard screaming and shouts of pain, as well as the sound of metal going through the air. After a minute, everything went silent except for some heavy breathing, and Asia looked up to see someone in a tattered brown cloak standing with a sheathed sword in his hand, while the other men were all unconscious around him on the floor. She looked at her savior, before he then used his sword as a crutch and began to wetly cough. Revealing to Asia that he was sick, she was about to call out to him, when he turned towards her and she could only see the lower half of his face, but she could see that his pale skin was covered in cracks as he appeared to be breaking down. As seen by the dust falling from the cracks, He then slowly walked, limped over to her, before he was standing before her and slowly reached his shaking, crack-covered hand out to her with his sword in his other hand and asked in a weak and raspy voice, "Are you all right?" Asia nodded her head, before she reached out and took his hand and stood up as he helped her up before they moved over to a bench. Asia slowly sat down due to her knee, before her savior then moved in front of her, and slowly got on one knee before he brought out a clean, blue cloth, bandages, and a flask that had a design of a sword with a ring and wings, that, from the sound of it, held some type of liquid, A.N. The Nephalem symbol from DMC, Devil May Cry. "This may sting a little as I need to clean your scrapes before I can bandage them, is that all right with you?" he asked with his raspy voice, while picking up the cloth and the flask which he opened. Asia, still a little shaken up from what almost happened, asked, "What is it?" The man then replied, "It is a combination of medicine, holy water, and hydrogen peroxide, which is used by doctors in clinics to disinfect wounds, cuts, and scrapes. The medicine mixed in helps to make it not hurt so much when it is applied, and so I don't have to use as much." Asia calmed down and nodded her head, showing she was all right with him cleaning her wounds. Before she moved the torn part of her nun's habit out of the way of her knee and arm, he poured a small amount of the liquid onto the cloth. Before he began lightly tapping her scrapes and she winced expecting the little sting he told her about, but was surprised when she didn't feel it. She watched as he delicately tapped her scraped knee, before putting down the now bloodied cloth, and he began to wrap her knee with the bandages. She looked to see that the cloth was actually a handkerchief, and she saw that the corner had the same symbol as the flask and was made from white string. That meant that it was his personal handkerchief he was using, and she felt touched that he didn't mind using his own personal effects for her health. She watched as he finished with her knee before moving to her elbow and began cleaning it, before also wrapping it in bandages. He put the flask away before handing her the bandages and said, "Here you go, so you can change the bandages later, as they will need to be changed." She nodded her head, before watching as he tried to stand only to fall to his knees and hands coughing horribly, and she quickly moved to his side with a worried look and asked, "Are you all right?" He then answered, "No, my body is breaking down. I need to find the owner of Twilight Healing. They will be able to help me." Asia was shocked as she thought the person originally helped because he knew she had Twilight Healing, but it turns out that he helped her because he honestly wanted to. Even when he could have used the time helping her to continue his search, he didn't. She then said, "I am actually the one with Twilight Healing." At this, her savior quickly looked at her and said, "You're the holder of Twilight Healing, truly?" She flinched a bit at the desperation in his voice, but she nodded her head and said, "Yes." She then cupped her hands a bit and summoned a green glow and said, "I am the holder of Twilight Healing. This is Perfy-Uk." He began before he coughed up a glob of blood. He was then panting before he muttered, "I don't have much time," though Asia heard him, and he slightly turned to her and said, "All right, sister. I need you to listen. Right now, my body is breaking down due to my power being imbalanced." Asia asked, "Why? What happened to cause this imbalance?" He then coughed and said, "Recently, I awakened my own sacred gear, but the power it held caused my own to shift, causing the imbalance. Now, because of this imbalance, my power is clashing with itself, causing my body to continuously weaken and break down until I die." Asia looked incredibly shocked and fearful of having her savior die. However, she was broken from her thoughts when the man continued speaking. "However, you can help me by settling my power." Asia was shocked before she said, "How can I help? I don't have much training in using my sacred gear. I can't even heal myself when I get hurt." "It's okay. I just need you to listen to me, all right?" he asked, getting Asia to think about it for a second before she nodded and gained a look of determination. "All right. Now I need you to activate your sacred gear, but try and focus on the soothing aspect of it." Asia nodded her head before she closed her eyes, and activated her sacred gear, getting green orb of energy in her hands. Before it slowly turned light blue, she felt the difference in her hands and opened her eyes to see it was now light blue. "All right. Now I need you to use that on me the same way you would normally heal someone, but instead of a continuous stream, try and use it in slow waves, like water. This will soothe my body and settle my powers down, and then I'll do the rest while you do that," he said, getting her to nod, before she focused on using the energy on him, which slowly enveloped his body. As she kept an eye on him, she slowly saw the energy become a mix of royal blue and red, with the royal blue seeming to be more present than the red. Until eventually the amount of red increased and matched the blue. As soon as that happened, she saw that the Mon's skin began to heal, with the cracks disappearing until all the cracks she could see were gone. Once the cracks were gone, she gasped when, from underneath the hood, she saw a pair of glowing blue eyes, before they settled down, and he smiled before clenching his fist. He then turned towards her and said, "Thank you for helping me, sister. if it wasn't for you, I don't think I would have survived another week." He then gave her a smile while nodding his head, before he then stood up and offered her his hand, which she took and stood up while also giving him a smile. "Now then, if you would be so kind as to tell me the name of the beautiful young woman who saved my life." Asia blushed as she was never usually called beautiful or complimented in general. She then said, "My name is Asia Argento. Would you mind telling me your name as well?" The man nodded his head and then kneeled down and gently took her hand and gently kissed the back of her hand, causing her to blush more before he said, "I have a name, but I currently cannot tell you, as you would be put in danger if you knew my name, so for now, you may call me V." Flashback end. After that, V stayed with her, keeping her company and protecting her. As well as some of the other nuns and innocent people, she and V grew closer to each other, and she could without a doubt say that he was her very first friend, and she had hopes of hopefully becoming more with the man, as well as hoping to find out what he looked like. However, one day he had disappeared from her life and left her a note saying that they would meet again in the future and to not worry about him. As time passed, she always hoped to see him again in her times of need. Like when she was excommunicated from the church, but he never returned. After all this time, she had thought he abandoned her and had almost stopped believing that he would come back, but now, she is beginning to have hope again when she sees the similarities between V and Naruto. This is also causing her confusion because she had recently started to have feelings for Issei, and all of a sudden, there's a chance that her very first friend and love interest is back. Before she could go further into her thought, she felt a hand on her shoulder gently shaking her. She looked and saw that it was Naruto kneeling in front of her while looking at her with concern. Asia shook her head and asked, "What? What did you say?" Naruto then replied, "I asked if you were alright. You came down, and then when I asked the first time, you seemed to have just zoned out on me. I didn't want to leave you alone, so I stayed here and waited until you snapped out of it." Asia cutely blushed before saying, "I am fine. Thank you for worrying about me. Just thinking about something from my past." Naruto nodded his head, before he stood up and held out his hand for her and said, "Well, if you're really alright, then let's get you used to flying now." With that, Asia smiled and nodded her head before taking his hand and standing up. Once she was up, Naruto brought out his wings and began to slowly go up into the air. Asia then brought hers out as well and began to follow him before she had one last thought. "Naruto-san, are you really my friend V? And if so, then why have you been gone for so long and only come back now? And what am I going to do about my feelings for Issei if it is you?" Before she could go further into her thought, she felt a hand on her shoulder gently shaking her. She looked and saw that it was Naruto kneeling in front of her while looking at her with concern. Asia shook her head and asked, "What? What did you say?" Naruto then replied, "I asked if you were alright. You came down, and then when I asked the first time, you seemed to have just zoned out on me. I didn't want to leave you alone, so I stayed here and waited until you snapped out of it." Asia cutely blushed before saying, "I am fine. Thank you for worrying about me. Just thinking about something from my past." Naruto nodded his head before he stood up and held out his hand for her and said, "Well, if you're really alright, then let's start getting you flying with your wings." With that, Asia smiled and nodded her head before taking his hand and standing up. Once she was up, Naruto brought out his wings and began to slowly go up into the air. Asia then brought hers out as well and began to follow him before she had one last thought. "Naruto-san, are you really my friend V? And if so, then why have you been gone for so long and only come back now? And what am I going to do about my feelings for Issei if it is you?" Present, 3 days before the raiding game. It was currently midnight, and Naruto calmly stood in the middle of one of the newly made training grounds that was around the Gremory Villa with his eyes closed and just enjoyed the fresh air of the forest. He had Yamato in his hand with it still in its sheath and was in his usual outfit, just waiting. Rustle. Rustle. Naruto seemed to twitch at the sound of some branches in a tree rustling, but he just stayed in his position without moving. Meanwhile, in the tree, we can see 2 people crouched in the tree with nervous expressions. The reason for the nervousness? Well, you see, after the first few days to get everyone accustomed to the weights and how they work using some simple exercises. Naruto amped up the training for most of the group. A lot. He hadn't been kidding when he said he would do his hardest to prepare them. And he made sure to place most of them under extreme conditions. They would have to stand in the sun while holding gravity-increased boulders above their bodies to build up strength and stamina. They had to swim against the current in the nearby river when Naruto would bring out his wings and flap them to make the river current stronger and crazier to build up lung capacity in the muscles throughout the entire body. When they all asked why he made them go through all this, he explained that while the exercises were very unorthodox and potentially hazardous, which they deadpanned at him for, The exercises also were the quickest ways to increase their strength without any chance of mortality. It was also for if the occasion arises that requires them to hold a boulder over their bodies or to swim against a current, though he did take it easier on Asia and had her doing different, easier exercises since she was mainly going to be a support role. In the beginning, however, he was going to change that and help her become the game changer in the future. When they asked what else he could have done, he nonchalantly explained that he could have made them climb up Mount Everest instead to increase their strength. Or made them run while hungry animals chased after them to increase their stamina. The group blanched when he talked about those two methods, as he then said, how those were only two of the many harder exercises he could have chosen that would have guaranteed bigger results, seeing as nothing was more motivating than the risk of dying. The group promptly shut up after that. Afterward, when they were done with training or if they sustained an injury, Naruto would have Asia use her sacred gear to heal everyone to help them recover quicker. This also served the dual purpose of increasing the length of time Asia could use her sacred gear as well as help her learn to better control her magic by sometimes healing all of them at once. In addition to that, Naruto also spent time getting reacquainted with Kaneko, Rias, and Akino as he had essentially disappeared from their lives for 5 years. He also spent time with Asia after she had gained the courage to confront him about whether he was her friend V or not. That was an interesting experience, to say the least. Flashback. Naruto was currently watching as Kaneko, Rias, Akino, Kiba and Issei all stood in the middle of the training ground he had made while they were holding themselves in the push-up position with boulders that were carved into a shark, a cat, a bear, a horse, and a koala. When the 5 saw the statues, they questioned why they were there. Naruto merely answered it was a hobby and to keep his sword skills sharp by carving the statues with such detail. Now originally, this might have been easier if it hadn't been for the shining black seals currently causing all the boulders to weigh 300 pounds each. Now, normally, this would have crushed them, but Naruto was allowing them to use just enough magic to physically enhance themselves only to prevent being crushed, though it probably didn't matter since he's had them do this for almost 3 hours now. And Naruto? When he heard this, Naruto turned to see a nervous-looking Asia standing behind him wearing a tight white sports bra that nicely hugged her C-cup breasts and a pair of forest green shorts that went to her mid-thighs, showing off her nice, long, and smooth legs, and hugged her ass nicely in a pair of white and black trainers. Her hair was currently in a braid to keep it from becoming an issue when working out, as Naruto currently had her running laps and increased the weights she was using a little more to make it more challenging for her. Yes. Is there something you need, Asia? Asked Naruto, as he hoped everything was alright. Asia nodded and said, why yes. I just wanted to talk to you about something. Asia then subtly looked towards the others and said, in private, if that is okay with you? Naruto noticed the look and nodded his head, while saying, I understand. Let me just deal with them very quickly and then I'll come to talk with you. Naruto then turned to the 5 to see the ground under their chins beginning to form little puddles of sweat and said, alright everyone, you're done for the day. As soon as he said that, with a wave of his hand, the seals stopped shining black and turned white, showing they were now decreasing the weight so that the group could flop to the ground without worry of being crushed. With that, Naruto looked back at Asia and motioned for her to lead the way, getting her to nod before the 2 walked off. After the 2 were sure the others wouldn't hear them, Naruto asked, alright Asia, what was it that you wished to talk about? Asia had her back turned to him as she began saying, about 2 years ago, in Italy, I was walking to an orphanage to help some of the children and to cheer them up. But I tripped and hurt myself on my elbow and knee. They weren't too severe, but they had prevented me from moving successfully due to the pain. It was early in the morning, so no one was awake and walking around to help me. However, some men walked out of a nearby alley and looked at me with lecherous eyes. And I knew what they were planning as they walked closer to me. As Asia talked, Naruto looked slightly angry, as also identified by him tightening his grip around Yamato and clenching his free hand until the knuckles were white on both hands. Asia didn't notice this as she kept talking while also pulling something out. I had closed my eyes wishing that someone would be there to help me and that it wasn't real. And then someone did help me. They were covered in a tattered cloak so I couldn't see them. But I saw their glowing blue eyes and had introduced themselves to me as V after I helped heal them. After that, V and I began to spend time together and got closer to each other, but then one day, he vanished and had disappeared and I hadn't seen him since. He left a note saying not to worry about him and that he would see me again in the future, and so I waited for him, but he never showed up. I waited for him, hoping, praying that he would come back. I wished that he would come back when I was excommunicated from the church, but he never showed up. As Asia had said all this, Naruto had a look of sadness and guilt. But before he could do anything, Asia turned back to him to reveal that she was holding something and was crying. He looked and noticed it was a royal blue handkerchief. And when he looked at the corner, he saw a familiar symbol. Asia then said, before he disappeared, I had taken this because I wanted to return it and to also ask if maybe he wanted to become a couple. But I never got the chance, so all these years, I've kept his handkerchief, used it, washed it, and kept it clean for the day that I ever met him again. I could give this back to him and tell him something. Asia then looked at Naruto with a determined look. That would have been impressive if the tears and slight blush on her face didn't make her look so cute. She then asked, so, my question is, are you my friend V, Naruto? And if so, where have you been all this time? Naruto sighed while he scratched the back of his head before he looked towards Asia and began to move towards her. With her not moving an inch, he then gently grasped her hands holding the handkerchief. Taking it from her and said, I never meant to leave you alone for so long, but unfortunately I was unable to come back as some enemies I made had found me and I didn't want them learning about you, so, I decided to leave to protect you. Naruto looked Asia in the eyes as he had been looking at the handkerchief the entire time, before he then said, I never meant to hurt you, and for that I am sorry, can you forgive me? Asia looked stunned as she had her eyes wide open and her hands covering her mouth before she began to cry some more. The only difference being these were tears of joy as he had confirmed that he was indeed V. Asia then launched herself at him and began to hug him while she laughed and cried as she said, I knew it, over and over. Asia then backed away as she wiped her tears, before saying, well, let's reintroduce ourselves. Asia then lightly cleared her throat before saying with a smile, hi, my name is Asia Argento. I am a former nun and am now a devil in the peerage of Rias Gremory. Naruto smiled before saying, it's nice to meet you, Asia. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I am a free knight, with a loose tie to Searsex Sensei's peerage and have recently returned after 5 years of traveling around the world. The two were happy that they could reignite their friendship from the past while Asia thought that she would finally get the chance to tell him her feelings, at some point at least. However, unknown to the two, someone had been listening in on their conversation and unknown to everyone, this will cause problems in the future. Flashback over. After that conversation, Naruto had also been reconnecting with Asia. Finding out about what has happened in her life since he had to leave, he was glad that she had made new friends with Rias and the others and that they had helped her integrate into the school. He was sad that she was excommunicated from the church and he wasn't there for her, though. He was also suspicious of the devil who had sought her out to be healed, especially since no devil goes to a church willingly, even if they were injured and the church had a healer. Naruto had decided that he would look into that interaction, as no devil did anything unless they had something to gain from it. Naruto had spent the past several days training the group to the best of his ability and he could honestly say that he was proud of them. The only one he seemed to be concerned about was Issei, as the boy had been acting strangely as of late. However, Naruto didn't know him that well, so he simply took it as this being the way the boy naturally acts. Anyways, Naruto just continued to stand in the middle of the training grounds waiting with his eyes closed. He then heard more rustling and slowly moved his hand towards Yamato's grip, and once he gripped it, several people jumped out of the bushes and trees and made a beeline straight for him. Naruto immediately began dodging all of the attempts to hit him, before he swung a sheathed Yamato around causing a gust of wind to blow the attackers back. When the wind settled, one of the attackers went on the offensive again with a sword. Naruto responded by blocking each strike with Yamato, which he still didn't draw from its sheath. Naruto then sensed something coming up behind him and swiftly jumped, flipping over the attacker who was aiming for a sneak attack. This caused them to hit the opponent with the sword, sending both flying, one from the failed attack, and the other from the momentum of their attack. Before the two could move, Naruto appeared and knocked the two on the head with his sheathed sword, knocking them out. Naruto then quickly had to dodge as several lightning strikes were launched where he was standing. Naruto looked up just in time for a flash of bigger lightning to strike, causing a cloud of smoke and dust to cover the area. The attacker was trying to look through the dust cloud to see if they managed to land the attack. However, before they could react, Naruto came flying out of the smoke, heading straight towards the figure, and before they could react, Naruto slammed the still sheathed Yamato into their stomach, sending them crashing to the floor, inadvertently clearing the dust from before. Naruto was about to push the offensive, when he suddenly sliced an arrow made of red and black energy, causing it to explode behind him. Naruto noticed more arrows coming towards him, getting him to fly through the air as he began to dodge them. But he then noticed that they began to follow him, surprising him a bit. Naruto began to pick up speed in an attempt to lose or dodge the arrows, but the arrows simply sped up as well. Naruto flew through the air, making twists and sharp turns, dodging the arrows and causing some of them to collide with each other. Naruto then noticed another arrow get launched and began flying straight for where it originated from. getting the rest of the arrows to follow. Naruto kept flying before he ducked down into the trees, making him have to dodge the trees along with the arrows. As he kept flying, the arrows would collide with the trees, either causing explosions or simply erasing whatever they came into contact with. The opponent who sent the arrows noticed Naruto was closing in on them, so they began charging up for a counterattack. They held their hand out, palm facing the sky, as red and black energy seemed to form a spear above their hand. The spear was long and shiny, as it seemed to also emit a slight black miasma, though the most notable thing was that the spear seemed to be completely solid and was entirely red, as there also seemed to be an ominous feeling coming from the miasma as well as the spear itself. Just look up FGO Guy Bolg. That is the design I am going for, but it is not the actual Guy Bolg, just designed off it. Once Naruto was within 100 meters and still heading straight for them, they launched their attack with a shout of Hakai no Yari. Number 1. The spear was incredibly fast, even faster than the arrows, which were no longer chasing Naruto as they had all hit trees, causing them to all disappear or blow up. After Naruto had finished with all the arrows, he was flying at high speed towards his target, but at the last second, he noticed a spear was heading towards him, causing his eyes to widen before he slashed at the attack using the now unsheathed Yamato. This caused an explosion which created a massive dust cloud, blinding the attacker as they searched for Naruto, before feeling something sharp and metallic on their neck. The smoke and dust cleared before revealing Naruto holding Yamato against the opponent's neck as he said, "I win, Rias." That's right, the people who had been attacking Naruto were, in fact, Rias and her peerage, though the two currently missing members were Issei and Asia, though that was for different reasons. Rias sighed as she felt Naruto remove his sword from her neck. She didn't sigh in relief as she knew Naruto would never hurt her like that, but more in disappointment that she couldn't beat Naruto. She turned to notice Akino walking over while carrying Kiba and Kaneko, all of them covered in scratches, and 1 or 2 scrapes or bumps, especially in Kiba and Kaneko's case, but nothing too serious. Once the 3 of them were in the new clearing that was created, Naruto turned and waved his hand. Before, the previously empty clearing shimmered, revealing a medium-sized blue barrier was in place, and inside was Asia, with several little animals around her and relaxing while she lay around and relaxed as well. Rias and Akino could see all of the animals were native to the forest. There was even Shadow, who was sitting calmly next to Asia. Once the barrier came down, Asia closed her eyes and began to focus on Akino, Kiba, and Kaneko as she brought out Twilight Healing, though there were very notable changes to it compared to before. When training had first started, everyone knew that Asia's Twilight Healing looked like a pair of rings, though now it seemed to have changed or evolved. Now, instead of 2 rings, with 1 on each hand, Asia sported what looked to be 2 metal, fingerless gloves instead with the same design and look as her Twilight Healing, which also didn't look uncomfortable or stiff as Asia was able to move her hands normally. Akino, Kiba, and Kaneko were suddenly covered in a layer of green light. Rias, Naruto, and Akino watched as all the scratches and scrapes healed and disappeared before Kiba and Kaneko began groaning as they slowly woke up from being unconscious. Asia then stopped as she opened her eyes, getting the light to disappear from around Akino and the now groaning Kiba and Kaneko before she stood up and walked over to the others with Shadow following and the animals dispersing. Kaneko and Kiba groaned for about another minute before the 2 of them looked at Naruto before saying at the same time, "Did you really have to knock us on the head with a sheathed Yamato?" Naruto simply chuckled and said, "Yes," as knowing Kaneko, she would attempt to fake being unconscious, before attempting a surprise attack. "As for you, I simply just felt like doing that so that I wouldn't have to deal with some of those annoying swords you figured out how to make." At this, everyone began laughing as Kiba and Kaneko grumbled since they were defeated so easily, before Rias stopped and turned towards Asia as she said, "By the way, I wanted to know, what are those gloves? They look similar to Twilight Healing but are gloves instead of rings." Asia giggled as everyone, minus Naruto, looked at her curiously before she walked over to Naruto and wrapped her arms around his right arm as she said, "Well, these are the Twilight Healing, but they evolved recently when I was training with Naruto. We're not sure why it happened, but it just happened so suddenly when he was teaching me the fighting style he suggested for me. In fact, we've been meaning to see what other abilities it gives me, but we haven't had the time." Asia finished while looking slightly crestfallen since, due to the small time frame, they couldn't see what she could do. Asia's expression, however, went from sad to surprise when Naruto patted her head after removing his arm from hers as he smiled and said, "Don't feel bad, Asia. This little outing wasn't meant to increase your strength by an incredible amount. This was only meant to increase what skills that all of you already had, and improve on them to give you guys more of a fighting chance. The fact your sacred gear evolved was a surprise, but it was a very welcome surprise. Asia smiled and nodded as she had to agree with Naruto on that, while the others were happy for Asia. Rias, however, was more along the lines of ecstatic, as she cleared her throat, gaining everyone's attention as she said, I know, according to my brother, that sometimes sacred gears gain other abilities or their current abilities evolve as well when they undergo an evolution such as this, so I was wondering, what abilities did you gain, Asia? Asia giggled as she replied, well, I can still heal people, though now I can heal people faster, and for longer periods. I can heal multiple people as well, including from a distance, though it becomes more effective the closer I am to who I am healing. Asia then brought up her hands before showing a baby blue light instead of the regular green light as she said, I am now also able to heal myself, and I've also gained an ability that uses only the soothing aspect of my sacred gear. At that, the other three were confused on how that would be effective, as Kiba asked, that is quite impressive, Asia-san, but how would a soothing effect be useful? Asia gained a slightly mischievous glint in her eye. That went completely over Kiba's head due to him believing Asia was harmless because of her cuteness. Rias, Akino and Kaneko, however, caught it and were slightly on edge due to their past with Naruto and his pranks when he was younger. Asia then turned to Naruto with a cute, questioning look that got Naruto to chuckle before he nodded his head while smiling. Asia, in turn, smiled, before she walked over to Kiba, and touched his thigh with her glowing blue hand. Immediately after Asia touched Kiba's leg, Kiba crumpled to the floor, much to the shock of himself and the others, minus Naruto. What just happened? Kiba shouted, very much freaking out since he couldn't feel his leg, and it was something that scared him. Asia giggled as she replied, hee, well, basically, what I did was relaxed your leg to the point that it feels numb, causing you to be unable to use it. The length of time the numbness stays is dependent on the person's own healing ability or if I simply touch them again. Asia touched Kiba's thigh again, letting Kiba feel his leg again and allowing him to stand up, then the numbness cancels and mobility is given back. Number 2. The group was shocked at such an ability, as to be able to take away someone's ability to use a limb was such an incredible ability. The fact that Asia can willingly use it since it doesn't cause pain was just a bonus since she wouldn't be afraid about defending herself now. That's amazing, Asia. I am so proud of you, said Rias, as she was proud that her healer would now be able to defend herself even more, especially since now, Asia could incapacitate opponents and enemies without actually hurting them. Indeed, now a little Asia won't have to worry about hurting someone to defend herself, said Akino, as she was also very proud of Asia. Asia blushed as she wasn't used to being complimented in such a way, but she still smiled as she was happy to be acknowledged like this. When she was with the church, she was thanked and complimented back then as well, but they thanked her for her sacred gear, not actually for anything she did. Don't get her wrong, she loved helping and healing people, but it became tiresome when people only thanked or complimented you for something you owned. Anyways, began Naruto, gaining their attention, that about wraps up this little training trip, and I am proud to say that all of you have Impro Crash. Naruto was unable to finish as there was a loud crash. Getting the group to look and see the missing member of their group was currently on the ground panting as he had a gauntlet on his left arm. The gauntlet was a blood-red color and seemed to almost resemble scales. There was a large green jewel implanted where the top of the hand is, as well as 2 golden spikes jutting out from the sides. This was the sacred gear known as the boosted gear. It earned its name due to its ability to double the power of the user every 10 seconds, however. The number of times the user can boost and the duration are all dependent on the user's stamina. However, the thing to notice was that he was currently sweating and panting like crazy. The reason? He was currently carrying 4 tree trunks with 2 in each arm as training. The point was to increase his physical strength by carrying the tree trunks while increasing his stamina and endurance by using his sacred gear to increase his strength and concentration because he needed to focus on keeping his strength and hands or face getting crushed. The crash just now was him dropping the tree trunks to the ground as Asia walked over and used her sacred gear to heal his pain enough so that it wasn't unbearable, but more uncomfortable. Issei looked to her and said, "Thank you, Asia-chan, but why didn't you heal me completely?" "Because Naruto-kun told me that by allowing your muscles to heal naturally, it lets them get stronger quicker rather than healing them with my sacred gear," replied Asia. Number 3. Naruto nodded his head and patted Asia's head as he said, "It's true. Anytime magic is used to heal injuries, it does make your body stronger, but nothing beats how strong your body becomes when healing naturally. I even told her not to heal the others entirely for that exact reason." Issei looked at Naruto with a mostly indescribable look, but one thing that could be seen was pure jealousy. He hated how Naruto was so much stronger than him and how he had the attention of all the girls. Even Asia seemed to favor Naruto over himself and she had just met him. Of course, Issei and the rest don't know about Naruto and Asia's history together. Then again, they never did ask if the two had a history since, to all of them, they had only just met during the meeting with Riser. Naruto then cleared his throat to get everyone's attention and said, "Now then, training is done and I want all of you to pack up to go home and get some rest and discuss plans for the last 2 days before the match. After all, there's no point in doing all this work if you don't rest as well." The group smiled, and with that, everyone went to pack up before getting some sleep and heading home in the morning. As the group walked, Kaneko realized that Naruto was still standing in the same spot and turned back before asking, "Naruto? Are you coming?" This got everyone else to stop as well and turn back before Naruto simply chuckled and said, "I have some things to take care of tonight and over the next 2 days, so I probably won't see you until the day of the rating game." Seeing the looks he was receiving from the group, mainly Asia, Kaneko, Akino, and Rias, he simply smiled and said, "Don't worry, it'll be fine. Go get some rest. You guys still have some preparing to do before the match." With that, the group began to continue their way to the villa. Asia looked back again with a worried look. Naruto, seeing the look, sent her a smile to reassure her that he would be fine, getting her to nod before she caught up with the group. Naruto continued to keep his senses up until he felt them all enter the villa, at which point, he began to make his way further into the forest. As he walked, he felt a presence was nearby and it seemed to contain an increasing amount of lust the closer he got to it. He narrowed his eyes as he stopped when he felt the presence vanish while he used his thumb to slightly unsheath his sword and tensed his body to move at a moment's notice. He was prepared to strike if they made a move against him when he suddenly heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. With his hand on the hilt of his sword, he quickly turned to see a black cat walking out of the bush staring at him with its golden eyes. Seeing the cat, Naruto sighed before relaxing his body and placing Yamato completely back into its sheath as he said, "Really, Kuroka? Need I remind you that attempting to sneak up on me is pointless?" The cat merely smirked before it was covered in a plume of smoke as he heard a voice say, "NYA. I guess my attempt in surprising Naru-chan was a failure, NYA." Once the smoke cleared, Naruto was treated to the sight of a very beautiful woman standing before him. Just like the cat form she was using, she had long black hair and golden eyes. She was wearing a tight, black kimono with a red interior and a yellow obi that accentuated her large E-cup breasts. She was also wearing an ornately decorated headband and a set of golden and black beads around her waist where her kimono had an opening, showing off her long, smooth legs. Something interesting about her was the pair of black cat ears and tails that were swaying behind her. This was Kuroka, the sulfur monosulfide class stray devil criminal known for killing her previous king. Naruto sighed while shaking his head and said, "Come now, Kuroka. You don't honestly believe that you had a chance to sneak up on me, do you?" Kuroka sashayed over to him before she wrapped her arms around his neck while wrapping a leg around him as she squished her breasts against his chest as she purred in his ear, "NYA. But it was worth a shot, Naru-chan. After all, it's been nearly 6 months since our last meeting and I wanted to see if I could get the drop on you this time." Kuroka squealed in pleasure at the end because Naruto had gripped her toned, heart-shaped ass with his hands and gave it a good squeeze. Kuroka had originally been trying to go after someone else's affections, read children. But when she had come across Naruto, Shed tried to attack him but had promptly put her in her place. She always got excited remembering that encounter. Flashback. 2 years, Kuroka was currently traveling around Europe in an attempt to find something that might be able to garner Valis' attention. She figured, maybe changing up her style would gain his attention, seeing as, despite practically being a shrug away from being naked, she never seemed to be able to get his attention as he always seemed to be more interested in fighting. As she was walking around, she saw some people who were running and from their scent, they were devils. However, they seemed to be running away from something if the panicked looks on their faces were anything to go by. She watched as the group ran before one tripped and fell with the rest of the group not even looking back. She watched as the devil scrambled to get up before he suddenly stopped moving and fell to literal pieces. Kuroka was shocked as she had sensed something right before the devil stopped, but she was broken from her thoughts when someone else passed the dead devil, sword in hand, as they chased after the rest of the devils. She couldn't see much from the person due to the tattered cloak they were wearing that covered them from head to toe. On top of that, she couldn't tell what this person was despite trying to sense him. She could tell they were something supernatural, but she just couldn't tell what. Deciding that her curiosity needed to be sated, she followed after the group by jumping from roof to roof. She watched as the group of devils eventually came to a dead end when they brought their wings out. She watched as the devils lifted off the ground but then the one chasing them swung their sword. She felt more than saw the attack as it passed the devils before each of them lost a wing as they were cut off at the same time. She couldn't recognize the attack but she knew it used a familiar type of energy. but she just couldn't seem to place it since it was in such a small quantity. She was broken from her thoughts when the cloaked figure walked up to the injured devils with his sword still in hand. She watched as they stopped and sheathed the sword before using it as a cane as the person then spoke to the downed devils. Now then, I believe you three have some answers to some question I have about your recent actions in this part of the human world and your leaders, said the cloaked figure who Kuroka could now identify was a male by their voice. One of the devils gained a brief burst of courage, stupidity, and shouted, "We aren't going to tell you shit, commoner filth." The area suddenly went silent and Kuroka could feel her tails and the fur on them standing on end as the entire area suddenly seemed to have an increase in gravity as the cloaked male suddenly gained a visible aura of dark blue energy with a dark red outline. Kuroka watched as the aura seemed to expand more and more before the person lifted their head and she saw their glowing blue eyes staring at the devil with absolute pity and power. The devil began to shake in fear before the aura died down and the cloaked figure walked past them, getting the devil to sigh in relief, the other devils to smirk smugly and Kuroka to get confused before they all heard a resounding ring. At that moment, the devil seemed to stop moving before they fell apart to several bloody pieces, while the cloaked figure continued walking up to the remaining two devils and asked, "Are you going to tell me what I want, or am I going to have to reunite you with your friend over there?" The two devils were extremely terrified at this point and nodded their heads, showing they were beginning to comply. Kuroka, on the other hand, was feeling curious about the male and the power they used for their attacks. "Excellent. Now then, my first question, what are you devils doing here in Europe?" The cloaked figure asks. We were told to cause UU unrest and tension be between the underworld and heaven, the first devil informed. By doing what exactly? Anything we wanted. If we wanted to kill someone, we could. If we wanted something, West Wed Street steal it, the second devil said. The devils saw the cloaked figure's glowing eyes narrow as his aura came back and he asked, "Did you rape anyone while you here in Europe?" This stopped the devils cold and judging by the pale, panicking looks they now sported, Kuroka and the cloaked figure could guess they had. However, the figure kept his cool for the moment as he asked, "This is my last question. Who ordered you to cause the tension between heaven and the underworld?" It was our leader. The first devil began before they along with the second devil spontaneously combusted into blue fire leaving nothing but ashes. Number 4. The cloaked figure had moved back when the fire started in surprise. While Kuroka did the same as she hadn't been expecting that, unfortunately, some of the flames caught onto the cloak and quickly began to spread but were unable to do anything when Kuroka saw the cloak get quickly thrown off in a show of blue sparks and embers while the now visible person gathered some of the flames along the edge of his sword. Kuroka would admit that this person was indeed attractive, but those devils were small fry, and being able to take them down didn't prove much. She was about to leave when she had to dodge an incoming attack, causing an explosion of the same blue flames while she backflipped. When she landed, she found herself face to face with the person holding his still flaming sword in front of her face with a hardened yet cold look on his face. Kuroka realized that she had gotten careless and underestimated this person simply because they were capable of taking down a couple of weak devils. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" the person asked. She looked up at the person in front of her. Kuroka answered, "I am Kuroka and I was just very curious when I saw this group of devils running away from something, though now it appears they were running from someone instead." She watched as the person narrowed his eyes at her. Before relaxing and walking away from her, she then watched as he summoned a magic circle. Or what should have been a magic circle. She noticed that it was royal blue on the outer and inner circles and there were no designs or symbols. She realized what he was doing, he was making new magic for himself. But he required something as a base. Then she remembered the blue fire and watched as he placed the circles over his still flaming sword before the fire was sucked into the circle causing it to spin while designs finally began to appear. The designs were dark red and continued to fill and complete the magic circle until she saw a symbol of a sword with wings appear in the center, showing he had completed his magic. Number 5. Kuroka was stunned by this as, while she may not pay much attention to magic due to using her senjutsu and yojutsu, she remembered Lafay saying that making a new magic circle was extremely difficult and dangerous to do, and yet, this person just made a new circle like it was the norm. Now she had to get this person to join Chaos Brigade. Kuroka realized she must have zoned out for a good 2 minutes as she then realized he wasn't anywhere in sight. Jumping to the roofs, she began to use her senjutsu to search for him to attempt to get him to join. Even if by force, she knew what she was looking for as she just had to look for the energy signature that she couldn't tell what it was. After getting a lock on him, she began to make her way to him before finding him in a park where he pulled out a slab of meat and gave it to a black panther. She was shocked to see the panther, especially when she got closer and saw that it didn't seem to be a normal panther. As she got closer, the panther suddenly stopped eating and began growling in her direction, gaining the young Mon's attention as well, before he narrowed his eyes at her and placed his hand in front of the panther, getting it to stop growling. "It's all right, Shadow, keep eating, I'll handle this," the young man said, getting the panther to look at Kuroka again, sending her one last growl, before it went back to eating its slab of meat, as if to say it was annoyed she interrupted its meal. The young man looked at her and asked, "Why are you following me?" Kuroka smirked and said, "I gotta admit, I originally was just gonna leave you alone, but then I saw you use that blue fire earlier to make a magic circle, and unfortunately for you, my group is always looking for people with talent and power, so I am gonna have to ask that you come with me." Keeping his eyes narrowed, he placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword while pushing it out a bit with his left thumb as he replied, "Sorry, but I don't think I'll be going anywhere with you." Kuroka's smirk dropped to a frown as she said, "I don't think you understand the position you're in or who I am. I am Kuroka, the sulfur monosulfide class criminal of the underworld, wanted for becoming a stray after killing my king, and you don't have much of a choice in this decision. Well, since you've introduced yourself, it is only proper manners that I do the same," the young man said, as he then said, "My name is Virgil, a knight, with loose ties to Sears X Lucifer, and if you think I am going to be a pushover," in that instant, Virgil had disappeared before appearing behind Kuroka, shocking her before she felt several scars appear on her body along with immense pain, as Virgil said, "Then this is going to be a very short battle." Flashback end. After that, the two had fought, with Naruto overpowering Kuroka with his speed and strength wearing Kuroka down. As even if she could sense him and his attacks with her senjutsu if she wasn't fast enough or had the endurance to outlast him. Then there was no point. After a while, Naruto had managed to knock Kuroka out, before he tied her up and took her to a location to find out what she knew. She had revealed that she was a part of the terrorist group known as the Chaos Brigade and how they lead by Ophis. She went to reveal how despite Ophis being the leader, she didn't interact or manage the group, so most of them end up doing their own thing without a care of what would happen to the other factions. After Kuroka had said everything she knew about the group, Naruto offered her a chance at redemption by becoming his spy in the Chaos Brigade, shocking Kuroka before she questioned him on why he would ask her. He surprised her when he said that he knew she had her reason for killing her king, as he had also been researching that incident for information to reunite her with her sister. He proved it when he pulled out an old journal that Kuroka recognized as her former king's. Kuroka had been shocked that this person, who she had tried to force into the group, would so willingly help and believe her, even going as far as researching her case that had gone cold after so long. Kuroka couldn't remember the last time she had cried so much out of joy and relief at someone believing her. Since then, Kuroka would report back to Naruto roughly every 6 months to not draw attention to herself. She had even made a challenge to Naruto, that if she could get the drop on him once, then he would have to marry her and let her bear his children. Naruto agreed, and since then she has tried 3 times and failed each time, with this being the 4th, and every time she failed, she would receive a punishment or as Kuroka would call it, a tortuous reward. Lime. If you are not 18 or up, I would advise you skip to the next bold heading, if not, then it's your choice. Kuroka was a moaning mess as Naruto was currently groping and massaging her E-cup breasts that were currently out of her kimono. Naruto had pulled her down to his lap as he sat down, cupping her left breast while snaking the other down her hip to her thigh, moving the kimono skirt, exposing the creamy flesh of her thigh while keeping her lower cat covered. "So, were you able to find any leads of where Lupus might be, among the 3 places I have yet to search?" Naruto asked huskily as he pressed himself into her neck, laying a butterfly kiss on it, making tingles go down Kuroka's spine as she enjoyed the feeling of his hands on her. "Yes, IIF found out, THTH that she has, been seen recently in AA America, that's AA all I can know for that SS subject, Kuroka stated quickly in between moans as her breathing picked up as he slid his hand under her skirt, brushing against her furred bush. Naruto gripped her breast tightly. "Are you sure, my sweet kitten?" Naruto asked as he moved the rest of her skirt to expose her furred pussy to the world and how she was starting to get wet, from the small amount of moisture but the great amount of heat emanating from her core, as well as how she kept herself neat as seen by how the hair was trimmed into a little heart. "Yes." Kuroka screamed as he prodded her clit. "Then I believe that is worth something," Naruto muttered, leaning back with her going with him, allowing him to nip her sensitive cat ear, making Kuroka shiver with anticipation. Naruto inhaled the scent of her long black hair, coconut peach shampoo. "She certainly does know what I like," Naruto chuckled as he continued to nibble on the Nico's ear, feeling her body against his shiver and his ears hearing the melody of her moans. Yes, Kuroka hazily thought as she felt him cup her wet pussy, her back arching as he ran his fingers up and down her moist folds, some of the juice smearing onto his fingers. You feel so hot and moist right now, Kuroka, Naruto whispered into her ear, earning a weak nod as she placed her head on his shoulder, turning her head slightly to look at him. I am. Nya, she slurred. Naruto rubbed his finger up, moving further, feeling her clit. So, on to other business, Naruto stated as he removed his finger from her clit. Kuroka's eyes widened as she felt an instant crash, and her body felt cold, metaphorically, as it was refused its release. Please, Nya. Continue. Kuroka begged as she grabbed his shirt and tried bucking her hips into his hand to get her release. Naruto smiled, released her breast and wrapped it around her waist, holding her still, as his other hand continued to gently prod her wet folds. Before I give you the release you want, tell me, what have the old Satan faction been up to? Naruto asked while still holding Kuroka, preventing her from bucking her hips to get the release she wants. Kuroka, desperately wanting her release, practically shouted, they have been making plans concerning the faction meeting that is coming up soon, but I don't know exactly what they are planning. I am sorry for failing you. Naruto smiled as he huskily said, you didn't fail me. You did more than enough by getting me this information already, my dear Kuroka. With that, Naruto moved his arm from her waist, allowing her to move again. Thank you. I also wish to tell you that Chaos Brigade is aware of Kokabiel attempting something as well to start another war. Kuroka finished and placed her hand on his cheek and the other on his hand, guiding it to her entrance. Now that I have been a good kitten, Nya, give me my reward. Kuroka begged as she forced his fingers inside of her, making her face become a dopey wobbly smile as her eyes became glossy with ecstasy. Naruto pulled out slightly, hearing her gasp and push against his hand to keep him inside, her warm insides grasping and lathering his fingers in Kuroka's fluids. More, Kuroka moaned before she pulled him closer and kissed him. Naruto pulled his fingers out and stood up, dropping Kuroka on her plump butt. Ow, Kuroka groaned. Why did you do that, Nya? You know my rules, Kuroka, Naruto stated as he helped her up and redressed her, no kissing when I do this for you and no. But I have kissed you several times in the past, Nya. Kuroka pouted weakly as her ears flattened, and her tails drooped, knowing she had screwed up. You are a good person, but your instincts are a weakness for you, Naruto said as he rubbed her head, so, until next time, Kuroka. Kuroka wanted to reach out, and when she did, he was too far away. Lime end. For those who skipped, you may continue reading now. Kuroka sighed as she knew she either needs to show more restraint with her instincts, which was impossible, or she needs to hurry and find Lupus so that she, Lupus, and Naruto can get it on already before she, Kuroka, can get her turn, and from what she's felt the one time he let it slide that she groped him, he was hiding a monster down there. Kuroka summoned a portal before disappearing, completely missing a pair of red eyes that had been watching the two of them with anger, jealousy and a hint of restrained lust. Soon, Naruto-sama, I will have my revenge soon, the figure thought, before disappearing. Time skip. Day of the match. It was finally the day of the match, and Naruto was making his way towards the school where he would meet up with the rest of the group. He knew they all had grown stronger and would be able to win against Riser, but he wanted to be there to make sure they were all okay. As he was walking through a park, Naruto suddenly sensed an incoming attack which he swiftly dodged before looking up in surprise when he saw a rocket that collided with him, causing an explosion. Do you think that did it? Asked a voice. I don't know. Why would you ask me? Shouted another voice. Because you're the one who shot the Ing rocket at him, shouted the first voice, before the two figures could be heard fighting each other. Enough. A female voice shouted, getting the two to stop and turn to the woman to see who it was. The woman had short blonde hair, red eyes, and delicate features that gave her appearance a cat-like feel. She had pale, soft skin that fit her appearance to give her that elegant beauty. She was wearing a cloak that hid her body from view. Of course that wouldn't be enough. After all, this is my former teacher we're dealing with, isn't that right, Virgil-kun? The woman asked before turning to look behind the group, getting everyone to turn around and find Naruto standing there just fine, the only difference being that he currently had a cold expression on his face while his eyes began to glow, showing he had switched back to his Virgil persona. Virgil looked around the area to see that he was currently surrounded by a group of 20 to 30 rogue exorcists. Looking at each one, Virgil would admit that they were all well trained and prepared, though they wouldn't be enough to stop him. However, his focus zeroed in on the blonde-haired woman in front of him as she smiled at him with lust and slight insanity. She seemed familiar and he tried to remember why she looks familiar before he finally remembered. Clementine? Asked Virgil, getting her to smile. That's right, Virgil-sensei, it's been a while, hasn't it? Clementine said with a smile still on her face as all the other rogues began pulling out their light swords or their guns. Noticing all the weaponry, Virgil asked, "What is this about, Clementine?" Clementine merely giggled before she had a slightly insane grin appear on her face as she said, "Why, this is our reunion party and these are my guests, and what kind of party would it be without a game?" Virgil narrowed his eyes at that before slightly turning his body while putting his hand on Yamato's hilt as he asked, "What kind of game?" "To kill you, of course," Clementine exclaimed as the rogues with their pistol began firing at Virgil, which he countered by rapidly drawing Yamato and spinning it around his body before holding out horizontally, showing that he had just stopped every bullet using his sword. Virgil's eyes then flashed for a second before the area was covered in lights, with them ending a second later and Virgil was in the process of sheathing his sword. "Weak," Virgil stated as he fully sheathed his sword, making a click noise. All the men Clementine brought with her were slashed to ribbons by dimensional slashes, making the former exorcist laugh at the carnage. "You were always so fast, Virgil-kun," Clementine stated happily with a crazed look in her as she shed her cloak. Showing her quite revealing armor, she was wearing a black tube top that revealed a lot of her cleavage and tightly hugged her E-cup breasts. On top of that, she was wearing a bronze cuirass with matching shoulder pieces. She was wearing a set of clawed gauntlets with brown leather forearm protectors. She was also wearing an extremely short, black skirt that just barely covered her toned ass with a set of bronze armor over the skirt. Underneath, she was wearing a black, skin-tight garter belt that went slightly above her skirt and connected to her black stockings that showed off her long, smooth legs. Finishing off her outfit is a pair of brown leather boots with one going all the way up to her knee and a pair of knife sheaths at her waist for a pair of stilettos. A.N.6. Now that is a revealing outfit for a woman under God, Virgil stated as he got into a Batojutsu stance, hand poised to draw Yamato. "Well, after what you did," Clementine lulled as she drew a stiletto. She then slowly, and you ally licked up the blade as she continued, "They marked me as a traitor, and thus we are in this predicament." She leaned down, hand on the ground, ability boost, greater ability boost, flow acceleration, greater evasion, invulnerable fortress, movement of the wind, Clementine thought as she increased herself as much as possible. "So, she learned some magic," Virgil thought as he felt magic swell within Clementine's body. "She has improved since I left." Clementine licked her lips, her eyes widening in ecstasy, and lunged at an incredible trajectory and clashed blades with Virgil, who drew and Yamato slammed into the stiletto. "Now for the surprise," Clementine stated happily as she drew the second stiletto. Sounds of metal striking metal echoed through the air intensely, and at the end, Clementine laughed as she, for the first time, evaded Yamato and managed to strike Virgil in the stomach. Blood crusted her weapon and hand. "Yes!" Clementine screamed in joy before she leapt back. "What the is that?" Virgil's body emitted his powerful energy, forcing the blade out of his body, sealing the wound shut with his healing factor. The energy surrounding him took the shape of an ugly dog-like creature, both it and Virgil glaring at her. A smirk appeared on Virgil's lips. "You have indeed gotten stronger, my dear student. You have increased your mobility and I was barely able to keep up with you by sight alone," he said as Yamato was gently swung with grace and precision, its otherworldly blade glowing as if the moon was upon it, Beowulf appearing on his arms and legs. "But you still have much to learn." "What?" Clementine asked as she prepared for more fighting. "Balance, breaker." His body was submerged in the power he exuded, and what replaced it was a monster. Meanwhile, with Rias' group, as Naruto was facing the group of rogue exorcists and his former student. Rias and her peerage were at the Orc waiting with Grafia. The reason they were waiting is that it wasn't time for the raiding game yet and they had wanted to meet early to discuss strategy. However, they had also been hoping Naruto would have been here already since, according to Grafia, she had beaten the lesson of always being on time into his head to the point that he arrives early, even earlier than Grafia. However, it's been almost 20 minutes since everyone had arrived, and there was still no sign of Naruto. Rias sighed as she said, "All right everyone." The rest of the peerage turned towards their king. As she said, "It looks like we'll have to start strategizing without Naruto-kun." "Do you think anything happened to Naruto-kun?" Asia asked as she had just reunited with her longtime friend and she didn't want to lose him already. Grafia took over at this point. "Naruto knows better than to ever arrive somewhere late. I should know since I taught him about the importance of arriving on time, so if he doesn't arrive on time, then there is a very good reason for it. After all, he isn't the type to leave those he cares about without a reason." Everyone's sweat dropped as they all thought, "You were about to say torture, weren't you?" However, They all quickly shook those thoughts from their heads as they were happy that at least he wasn't abandoning them. Kaneko was especially happy since, even if he helped clear up why Kuroka did what she did, she still had some slight abandonment issues, so she was happy to find out that he hadn't abandoned her them. But now she was worried if he was okay. So, now we need to discuss how we are going to face Riser without Naruto being here, Rias said as she pulled up videos from his previous raiding games. From what I can see, he tends to let all his other pieces fight and weaken the enemy before he, his queen, and his sister come in for the kill. In a sense, we need to make sure we don't use too much energy when dealing with all of them, and we especially need to make sure that pawns don't make it over to our base or that's game over for us. Why would it be game over? Asked Issei as he was still new to the whole raiding game thing. Akino decided to pick up at this point. You know how other than the king, the queen, is the next strongest piece, yes? When Issei nodded, she then explained, well, it would be game over for us because if all of the pawns make it to our base, then they can promote to queen. And instead of facing one, we would be facing the equivalent of 9 queens. Issei paled at that as he knew how strong Akino was, and if this was the same as facing 9 Akinos, then he'd really have to make sure they stopped the pawns. Okay, so how are we going to stop them? Issei asked. We could set traps. Everyone turned to Kaneko, prompting her to continue her idea. If we place traps, then we can stop them and not use as much energy, Kaneko said before she continued. Naruto told me that the best traps are the ones that hide behind dummy traps and capture the enemy instead of hurting them. So, if we place traps that act as decoys, we can use that to take away their focus. I would suggest a cage trap to prevent them from leaving, doubled with electric magic to make it an electric cage that will hurt them if they try to escape. Everyone nodded with Akino being happy that she can help with the traps. Asia then asked, do we know what the area will be for the match? Graphia nodded her head as she brought up a map of Kuo Academy before she said, the match will take place in a replica of the school that is made on a separate dimension. Your base will be the club building we are currently in, while they will have the student council room on the other side of the school. Thank you. And in that case, Asia said to Graphia before turning to the map, I'd suggest that we place traps around the building, throughout the forest area, and then through the baseball grounds. These are the likeliest places they will travel while giving us some more defense. Asia, upon not hearing anything, turned around to see Rias and the others were staring at her with wide eyes. She blushed and asked, what? When did you become so good in tactics like this, Asia-chan? Rias asked as she had not been expecting sweet, little Asia to be such a tactician. Asia blushed a bit more as she said, well, Naruto-kun decided that since I wouldn't be at the level of strength he wanted for me by the time the raiding game came around, he would also teach me tactics and war strategy to make up for it until a later time. So, he made sure to have me play games about strategy with him as well as read strategy books to increase my knowledge on the subject. #7. Everyone smiled, including Graphia, at how much Naruto cared for them. He knew that not all of them would be up to par within the amount of time they had, so he looked to increase other areas and skills to make up for it. Rias cleared her throat as she then said, alright, what else would you suggest then, Asia-chan? With that, they began making a plan to hopefully deal with every possible change that Riser makes. As their extra time came winding down, Graphia eventually cleared her throat, gaining everyone's attention as she said, it's time, Rias-sama. Rias nodded her head, as everyone finished preparing with Kiba summoning a sword to his waist. Asia summoned her Twilight Healing, Issei summoned his boosted gear, while Kaneko put on some MMA gloves with pink paw prints on the back of the hand. Akino and Rias hadn't changed much, but they now had books in their hands. The others weren't sure what they were for or where they got them, but they left it alone for now. Meanwhile, Graphia had wide eyes at seeing the books as she knew exactly what they were. How did they get those? Those are only found among witch covens and either the witches' forest or wizard guilds, Graphia thought in shock, as she knew that witches and wizards tended to keep to themselves. Number 8. Graphia then shook her head as she said, I will now teleport you to the area of the match. A magic circle suddenly appeared underneath the group as it slowly began transporting them to the dimension of the raiding game. Before they were completely gone, Graphia said, good luck, and I will try and find Naruto to see what has happened, so just focus on the match. Rias and the others nodded with all of them smiling except for Issei, though none of them saw him. Once they were gone, Graphia made an ice clone that will act as the referee of the match while she went to look for Naruto, as even though she had faith in him as his teacher, she was still worried about him. I hope you're alright, Naruto, Graphia thought, as while Rias and the others might not have noticed it, she felt the surge of power throughout the town. With that, Graphia left the orc building to look for Naruto while her clone teleported to referee the match. With Rias and the others, once everyone finished teleporting, they opened their eyes, though Issei was confused as he asked, "Did the teleportation work?" Akino answered, "Yes, it did. Just look outside." Looking outside, Issei saw that the sky was green with a fluctuating aurora borealis that was an almost white green. Suddenly, everyone heard Grafia talking. "Greetings everyone. This is the rating game between Rias Gremory and Riser Phoenix. Both teams have 5 minutes of preparation before the match begins." After that, Rias turned back to her peerage with a determined look and said, "All right. Kiba, go set the traps in the areas we discussed before arriving." Kiba nodded before using his speed that had increased even more thanks to the training with Naruto and vanished from sight to place the traps. Turning to Akino, Rias said, "Akino, you and your familiars go charge the traps and place the decoys." Akino simply smiled while summoning her familiars, which were a bunch of little imps. They took off to charge the traps with electricity while also placing the decoys to lead towards the real traps. After they came back from placing the traps, Rias then began telling everyone where they will go. Akino will be in the air looking out for the others, eliminate those caught in the traps and keep an eye out for risers. Queen Ubaluna, who is also known as the Bomb Queen. Kiba was to watch the other side of the forest that had fewer traps to provide better defense until Issei, Kaneko, and Asia were done securing the gymnasium. Once they secured the gymnasium, Asia was to return to Rias while Issei and Kaneko left to support Kiba. After they accomplished defending their side, they would push for the offensive and close in on Riser. It was at this time that they heard Grafia's voice again. "The 5-minute preparation time is over. The rating game between Rias Gremory and Riser will now begin. Alright, Akino, Kiba, you know what to do. Issei, Kaneko, Asia, head towards the gymnasium. The sooner we remove that from play the better. Make sure you all watch each other's backs and stay safe." Rias exclaimed as she and everyone else remembered what Naruto told them while training. It doesn't matter if plans fail or orders are ignored as long as you all make it back safe with your friends and comrades. Naruto had told them this as he had made it his personal rule to always make sure all his friends and everyone he met returned home, safe and sound. It was that same personal rule that each of them took as their own as well, so they had decided that from now on, they would always make sure each of them made it back safely. With that, everyone left while Rias stayed in the copy building of the Orc while looking at the book that she had brought with her. She remembered when Naruto gave her and Akino the pair of books, or to be more specific, grimoires. Flashback. Rias and Akino were now trying to come up with different attacks using their training of shape manipulation that Naruto had put them through. Interestingly enough, they found it to be easier since the two of them had inspiration from different hobbies that they enjoyed, like Rias' anime or Akino's BDSM hobby. "Rias, Akino, take a break and come over here please." The two had stopped and turned to see Naruto was in the area and he still carried his sword with him, but they also noticed a pair of books he had under his arm. The two walked over as Rias asked, "Yes Naruto-kun, what is it?" Naruto looked at the books for a second before he held them out and said, "I wanted to give these to you too." Taking the books, Rias and Akino were grateful for them. But they were also confused until Naruto continued, "I know it is slightly confusing but let me explain. Those are known as grimoires and they hold incredible magic, spells, and other things that I won't tell you since I want it to be a surprise." Rias and Akino pouted at that, causing Naruto to chuckle before he continued, "Anyways, I am giving these to you because I believe they will help you. I do not know when as that will be entirely up to the grimoires themselves." This confused the two as Akino asked, "Don't you just mean up to us?" Naruto shook his head as he said, "No, because a lot of times, the grimoires are the ones who decide when is the best time to help. Once you have proven to be at a sufficient level will you be able to actively use the grimoires without issue, but until then, they will decide what spell is best for the occasion, though it will be extremely draining so be careful when using these spells. A.N.#9. Flashback end. Rias clutched her fist tightly as she had a determined look in her eye and thought, "It'll show you that your training was not in vain, Naruto-kun." With Issei, Kaneko and Asia, the three had just entered the gymnasium and were sneaking through in case some of the opposing peerage members were already inside. The three of them were about to cross from behind the stage when a voice called out to them. "We know you're there. You might as well come out already." Looking at each other, the three of them decided to just walk out from behind the stage and look to see who called out and found that it was two of Riser's pawns. The twins, Eel and Nell, along with one of Riser's rooks, Schwalen. Eel and Nell looked to be very young girls with turquoise hair and blue eyes. They both wore white t-shirts with blue accents, black leggings, sports socks that went up to just below the knee and blue and white tennis shoes. Both held a bag in their hands, with one being colored blue and the other being colored pink. Shuaylin, on the other hand, was a well-endowed, young woman with blue eyes and black hair styled in 2 buns and V-styled bangs. She was wearing a blue kippah with gold accents that is open at the chest area, showing off her D-cup breasts, while she had a white sash tied around her waist. To finish off her outfit, she had a pair of black, low-heeled shoes and black armguards on her forearms. Look, look. It's the perv who insulted Riser Sama and called him filthy. Eel exclaimed while pointing at Issei, getting Nell to laugh while Shuaylin lightly chuckled. The right side of Kaniko's mouth was twitching in her attempt to not smile, while Asia had a sheepish expression. Issei, on the other hand, just looked pissed at being made fun of for who he was. What made it worse was the fact that he couldn't defend himself without making himself out to be worse. On top of that, neither Kaniko or Asia were trying to defend him either. Then again, they really couldn't say anything since it was true that he was a perv and that he had insulted Riser. But Issei was at least going to try and defend himself as he exclaimed, "Hey! I may be a pervert, but at least I don't go around trying to practically force myself on girls like he practically did on Asia-chan." Asia slightly flinched at the reminder, but both also noticed how the girls seemed disgusted with Riser's actions and were surprised when Shuaylin said, "Yes, we wish to apologize for that, as Riser Sama is indeed not the best person, both in terms of personality and actions. We understand that his actions as of late have been inexcusable. Unfortunately, we are unable to say anything due to being low-class devils." Kaniko, Asia, and Issei nodded their heads in understanding. Kaniko because she had grown accustomed to the rules of devil society, while Asia and Issei were taught about how low-class devils were treated worse amongst other peerages due to being low-class. They knew that most high-class devils are cruel to their peerages or just don't care, with the Citri and Gremory families being some of the only families who treat their peerages like family. Asia replied, "It's okay. You should nt be the ones who apologize for your king's actions. Besides, I am pretty sure that Virgil-kun would humiliate him if he ever tried anything towards me and the others." Kaniko and Issei smiled at Asia's kind nature, while they also knew that Naruto would most definitely humiliate Riser if the flaming chicken tried anything. Shuaylin, Eel and Nell were all surprised at the former nun's words but smiled at knowing she didn't blame them for their king's actions. "What's Virgil-san like?" Eel asked, while Nell then asked, "Yeah, what's he like? What's he like?" Shuaylin then showed interest as she asked, "I must admit, I am quite curious as well. What is Virgil-san like?" "Well," Kaniko began, before deadpanning, "he's a slave driver. He acts cold towards people who cross him and shows no mercy towards those who hurt the ones he cares for." Kaniko then showed a soft smile as she said, "However, despite how he acts, he is extremely kind and shows more mercy towards people. He has a soft, caring side that he hides behind all of that stoicism and coldness and tends not to show it in the most obvious of ways, but he still does regardless of whatever he says." This surprised Shuaylin and the twins, as they had seen Virgil's mannerisms and stoicism and were kinda scared when they first saw him. However, to find out that he had a softer side to himself made them very curious. Now that they had thought about it, when he first arrived, he could have hurt Mira much more than he did, but he simply knocked her out by sending a pulse of energy to send her into the wall. "Wow," Shuaylin said with a shocked expression still on her face. "Now I am very curious about this so-called softer side of Virgil-san." Looking at Eel and Nell, Shuaylin asked, "How about you girls?" Eel and Nell smiled as they both exclaimed, "Yeah." Shuaylin then looked back at the Gremory group and asked, "Do you know if Virgil-san is a high-class devil and is looking for a peerage?" The Gremory group was confused by this and they looked at each other before shrugging their shoulders as Asia answered, "We're not sure if he is looking for prospective members for a peerage, but he has told us that he isn't a high class yet. He is mid-class but simply needs to prove that he has the power, control, and strength to become a high class." Shuaylin and the girls looked down at that, getting Asia to be curious. "Why did you wish to know?" Shuaylin then looked at the three and sighed before she said, "The reason we're asking is that we wanted to see if he would like to take us on as his peerage members." This shocked the Gremory group, getting Kaniko to ask, "Why would you want to go with Virgil-kun?" Shuaylin scoffed and said, "I am not sure if you've noticed, but the peerage doesn't like Riser Sama, and we all found out that he manipulated us in some way when we originally met him. For example, these two lost their home and mother in a fire and Riser Sama had saved them and they joined his peerage. But we later found out that he had caused the fire just make himself out to be the hero, since he had seen their mother's beauty and had originally wanted her but she refused. For Yubaluna, she was once part of a noble family and was a part of an arranged marriage herself, but she was seduced by Riser and made to believe that he cared for her. She willingly left with him out of love, only to find out that he only cared for her body and not for her as a person. Now, she puts on a strong front, but I and the others in the peerage know that she is miserable. 10. Kaneko, Asia, and Issei were stunned that even Riser's own peerage hated him, but after Schwalen explained why, then it made sense. If they had all been manipulated into joining Rias' peerage through a sad and traumatic event or their feelings, they would hate her too. Asia had to wonder though, why were they telling them this? Asia began, getting everyone's attention. Why are you telling this to us? Wouldn't it be better if you told the Satans about what's been happening? Schwalen sighed as she said, while that is true, who's to say that they would even take the time to listen to us? Like I said, we're only low-class devils, and it would turn into a game of the word of a bunch of low-class devils versus a high-class devil's word. If that ever happened, it would probably end up going in Riser-sama's favor before the rest of us are punished. That's also the reason why we still have to participate in this rating game, even if we don't want to. Issei, Kaneko, and Asia nodded their heads in understanding, as there would always be a case of nobles being favored for their class and status rather than being fair to all. Kaneko understood that from past experiences of when she had first met Sirzex when he saved her from being executed for the actions of her sister. Meanwhile, Asia and Issei knew that from the human world and how the underdogs were always looked down upon. Kaneko nodded her head and said, "We understand, and if it makes any difference, well, see about getting our king to talk to her brother about your situation. And while I understand that you don't wish to take part in the rating game, don't think we won't take it easy on you." Kaneko finished with a smirk as she tightened her gloves. Schwalen smirked along with Eel and Nell, who Schwalen had told to uncover their ears, as she got in a stance and replied, "We wouldn't have it any other way, isn't that right, girls?" Eel and Nell both exclaimed, "Yeah," before they suddenly pulled out a set of blue chainsaws which they revved up, and the chains were suddenly lit on fire. With that, Eel and Nell charged towards Issei and Asia while Schwalen charged Kaneko, officially starting the fight between the two peerages. Kaneko versus Schwalen. Schwalen first struck with a right jab while Kaneko blocked and threw her own, which Schwalen dodged. Schwalen then threw a kick at Kaneko with her right leg, which Kaneko leaned back to dodge, catching a glimpse of something that caused her to smirk. Kaneko jumped back with her arms still ready as she said, "I didn't take you for an exhibitionist." Schwalen blushed at this as she glared at Kaneko and exclaimed while throwing another kick and said, "I am not. But Riser-sama ordered me to not wear anything underneath, despite my protests. I would have been fine with no bra since it would have looked strange with my outfit, but he expressly said no panties as well." Kaneko frowned at that as she dodged the kick and said, "Now, that's just abusing his position." Schwalen sent another kick towards Kaneko. "Right. I asked why and he told me it was so he could take me easier when he was in the mood," Schwalen said in disgust. Kaneko grabbed the leg and threw Schwalen into the wall, making a dent and getting a grunt from Schwalen. Schwalen picked herself up from the wall before she picked up one of the nearby benches and threw it at Kaneko. Kaneko slammed her fist into the bench, shattering it, but what she did not expect was for Schwalen to make use of that opening and kicked Kaneko in the side. This sent Kaneko flying, and where she slammed into a bunch of other benches, slightly tearing her shirt and skirt to show some of her midriff and some of her thighs. Schwalen smirked at Kaneko, getting her to glare before charging at Schwalen, with Schwalen doing the same before they jumped and threw a punch at each other's faces at the same time. Thankfully though, Kaneko had built up her defense and strength with her training, so she wasn't knocked back and instead had sent Schwalen slamming into the ground, making another dent. Schwalen was coughing as she had the air knocked out of her but was pushing herself up when Kaneko landed on her, causing her more pain and knocking her back to the ground. When Kaneko moved forward to land the finishing blow, they heard an exclamation of, "Haha." Meanwhile, Asia versus Nell. Asia and Nell were in the middle of a fierce match to see who would land the first shot, as Nell kept swinging her flaming chainsaw while Asia tried to look for an opening. Asia was glad that Naruto had taught her how to fight, as now she was able to hold her own against some opponents. Asia knew that she was only doing well against Nell because Nell was around the same skill level as her, so it wasn't too difficult, but it wasn't easy either. Asia was currently dodging Nell's chainsaw while she had her twilight healing out and her hands were shining blue. "This is a lot more difficult than I thought it would be," Asia thought to herself as she dodged another swipe but had her sleeve caught and torn off her nun's habit. "So, I need to ask." Nell started getting Asia's attention while the two were still fighting. "What's it like, being under your king's service?" Asia blinked as she dodged another swipe before seeing an opening and landing a palm strike on one of Nell's hands and legs, numbing them and shocking Nell as she crumpled to the floor. Asia smiled then replied, "It's nice. Rias-san is very kind and treats all of us with respect, like family." Nell puffed her cheeks as she looked up at Asia and said, "Lucky. Riser-sama only treats us like his playthings. Like we aren't actual people and only objects meant to please him. And while Schwalen and the others think me and my sister don't know what he's done and try to protect and shelter us, We know exactly what he did. We just don't want to hurt their feelings by thinking they couldn't protect us. Nell finished sadly as she felt bad about tricking the other girls in the peerage. It was bad enough that her younger sister, Eel, came out traumatized, but if they were to find out that they failed in trying to protect them, they would feel terrible. Asia, sensing Nell's sadness, said, "Well, I think you should tell the others that you and your sister are aware of what he did." Nell looked at Asia like she was crazy, but then Asia continued, "You're afraid of hurting their feelings if they find out that you and your sister know what he did. That is very true. It will hurt their feelings." Nell looked like she was about to agree until she heard what Asia said next. "But it won't hurt as much as them finding out that you and your sister knew, and never told them. It would make them feel like you didn't trust them, and that is the worst thing you could do to them." Nell was shocked as she hadn't thought about that, and she realized that Asia was right. Looking back up at Asia, Nell was about to thank her until both hers and Asia's attention was caught by an exclamation of, "Haha." Meanwhile, Issei versus Eel, while Kaneko was fighting her fellow Rook, and Asia handled one of the twins, Issei was in a panic while dodging and running from Eel, who was swinging her chainsaw around in an attempt to hit him while shouting various lines like, "Stand still. I just want to slice you up a bit. Or come on, don't you want to play? Or don't worry. You'll be fine, probably missing a limb, but you can get that healed easily." The scary part was that she was saying all this with her childish voice, freaking Issei out. Of course, Issei wasn't getting tired as easily thanks to his training, but that voice she was using did not match what she was saying. And it scared the hell out of him. "Get a hold of yourself, partner." Issei almost tripped at the sudden voice in his head, but his fear of getting sliced by the little, chainsaw-wielding girl outweighed his surprise. "Diedrich?" Issei mentally asked. "No. This is the other voice in your head, Bob," Diedrich said sarcastically, before shouting, "Of course it's me. What the hell are you doing?" "I am running for my life." "What the hell do you think I am doing?" Issei mentally shouted, as he dodged another swing that came close to him. "I mean, why didn't you just summon your sacred gear to boost your defenses?" Diedrich shouted, getting Issei to smack himself before he summoned the boosted gear to his left arm. With an exclamation of boost, Issei was able to feel himself get stronger and faster as he turned around and dodged Isle's next swing before he backhanded the chainsaw with his left arm. This knocked the chainsaw out of her hands, shocking her before she fearfully looked at Issei. "Haha. Now have a taste of my new spell," exclaimed Issei, drawing everyone's attention as he had his right hand ready to snap his fingers before he exclaimed, "Dress break." He then snapped his fingers, and before anyone could react, all the girls in the gym had their clothes ripped and torn apart until nothing but rags were left, leaving Kaneko, Asia, Eel, Nell, and Schwalen all naked. "Kya!" All the girls screamed and began to cover themselves as they now realized that they were completely in the nude. Issei himself was laughing like a moron until Kaneko quickly smacked him on the head, driving him to the ground as she said in an angry, yet monotone voice, "Die, pervert." This had the effect of getting Issei's head stuck in the hardwood floor while he tried pulling himself out. Issei kept trying to pull himself out when he heard multiple pop sounds before hearing some rustling. It took him about 10 minutes before he finally managed to get his head out of the ground, expecting to get another glimpse of all the naked girls. Only to come to see a clothed Kaneko now wearing a pair of short shorts that hugged her toned ass nicely and showed off her smooth legs. She was also wearing a pair of white trainers with a black and white striped t-shirt and jean jacket while she still had her MMA gloves. Asia was now wearing a bright yellow skirt that went halfway down her thighs and a set of white thigh-high socks with yellow shoes. She was also wearing a white button-up shirt with an open, yellow cashmere sweater on top. Issei would admit they looked very cute, but he was still disappointed in being unable to see them naked. Remembering the other girls, Issei frantically looked around until he spotted them, only to groan in disappointment again. Schwalen, Eel, and Nell were given sets of gray sweatpants and sweatshirts while being tied up with some rope. "Where did you guys get all of those clothes?" Issei asked, as while he had very much wanted to see all the girls naked again, he was also extremely curious. Kaneko and Asia looked at Issei and they pulled their sleeves up to show a mini magic circle on their forearms, and Asia said, "Virgil-kun placed these on our arms, along with Ria-san, and Akino-san. He said they are storage circles that we can use to hold a certain amount of items, and he had suggested packing extra clothes when he found out about your dress break spell." "What? How did he find out?" Issei exclaimed, as he could have sworn he had kept it a secret. Kaneko looked at Issei with a deadpan and said, "You didn't honestly expect him to be as strong as he is, and not have a way to spy on all of us, did you?" Issei looked down in frustration at that and said, "I guess I didn't think of that." Kaneko figured that had been the case since Issei only seemed to have Opie and the like on his mind and never actually thought with the head on his shoulders. That was something that she didn't like about Issei, and with how much he thinks about and stuff, she wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being a offender with those so-called friends of his. Kaneko then summoned a magic circle by her ear and said, "We've taken the gym. Akino-senpai, 1, Rook, and 2, Pawns, have been captured as well. We've also found out some interesting information and would very much like to meet up as soon as possible." "Roger that, Kaneko," Akino's voice said from the magic circle. "Proceed with the plan and make your way towards Kiba-kun with Issei-kun after escorting Asia back to Rias." "Understood. And try to make their elimination as painless as possible, please," Kaneko told Akino. "I'll do my best," responded Akino, getting Kaneko to sigh before the magic circle vanished. Kaneko looked to Issei and Asia as she said, "All right, our job here is done. Now we're going to escort Asia back to Rias before meeting up with Kiba-senpai." The two nodded their heads before all three left the building, and once they had left they saw a bright flash from behind them. Turning around, they saw that the gym had been destroyed before hearing an announcement. One of Riser-sama's, Rooks, and 2 of Riser-sama's, Pawns, have retired. Kaneko, Asia, and Issei all looked up to see Akino in her Miko outfit, which consisted of a white haori with red accents, red hakama along with a pair of zori and white tabi. The group noticed that she was carrying the book with her, and they also noticed its intricate design. It had a light blue cover with plant-like designs on the front and back cover, while it had lightning designs running along the spine. Then in the center of the front cover was another lightning symbol, A-N-11. Akino looked back down at the trio before waving at them with a smile before she flew off. Kaneko then looked to Issei and said, "All right, we need to get Asia to Rias already. I don't like her being out here with just you and myself being the ones to protect her." Issei nodded in understanding, as the two of them weren't able to provide the best protection, especially from long-range fighters. With that, the three of them moved to get Asia to Rias before Kaneko and Issei moved to meet up with Kiba. Meanwhile, in the forest area, we find the rest of Risers, Pawns, walking through the forest cautiously. They were originally just strolling through the forest and launching fireballs at what they thought were horribly hidden traps. This turned out to be a mistake, as they found out those weren't merely decoys when they had triggered a trap in the form of a cage and had to quickly dodge. They were shocked to see that it wasn't even a regular cage, but an electric cage that was meant to prevent them from touching it or they would end up unconscious. After that, they had decided to proceed with more caution, as they wouldn't know which would be a fake and which was real, and if some traps were better hidden. This had slowed them down considerably, but they were finally making headway and finally had the Orc Club in their sights. "Finally made it. That took so damn long," exclaimed one of the Pawns. She had tanned skin, long, pale blue hair, and amber eyes with purple highlights around them. She was wearing a bikini made up of a metallic underwire brassiere that did nothing to hide her high C-cup breasts and a silk loincloth that exposes her sides and shows off her long, smooth legs and tight, toned ass. Also, she was wearing a silver tiara that had a ruby in the center that matches her earrings, along with silver neck rings that had a sapphire. She also wore a pink veil around her arms and behind her back, with a silver snake-themed bracelet on her upper arm of her left arm and a pair of sandals. "Calm down, Sharia. We don't want anyone to discover our location," said one of the other Pawns. "Especially since they may already know we're here after we triggered some of their traps," added another one of the Pawns. These two looked to be your average maids, as they were both dressed in French maid outfits with some slight differences. The first one had shoulder-length, light brown hair and dark brown eyes. She wore a buttoned, sleeveless maid outfit that hugged her mid-C-cup breasts with the standard cuffs, headpiece, and apron with white lace design. She also wore light gray tights with black shoes. The second one had shoulder-length maroon hair and blue eyes. She also wore a French maid outfit, though hers was open, showing off her D-cup breasts, and had white lace along the edges. She also wore the standard headpiece and apron with a pair of gloves that went up to her forearm and black shoes. "Come, you two, just calm down, and Sharia, please understand that we've activated several traps, so it is very likely that they know we're here," the familiar form of Mira said. These 4 Pawns were Marion and Burrant, the maids of Riser's peerage, Sharia, the dancer and entertainer of Riser's peerage, along with Mira, the current weakest member of Riser's peerage. These 4 were given the order to try and invade Rias base to promote to Queen. Before they moved on to help take down the rest of Rias peerage, the group suddenly stopped, however, when they saw the familiar sight of Rias Knight Kiba Yuto with a simple katana at his side. Kiba turned towards the Pawns, as he had a calm smile on his face, and he said, "What took you for so long? I figured you would have been here a while ago." This kinda pissed them off, as he probably knew they had to dodge traps and had spent the entire time just standing around relaxing. Unfortunately, Sharia had a bit of a temper and she charged Kiba, completely ignoring her fellow peerage members' warnings. Sharia jumped towards Kiba, intent on kicking him in the head until he disappeared from view. Sharia was so shocked that she wasn't able to react in time when he appeared in front of her and clubbed her in the stomach with the sheathed katana. This sent her flying back to her fellow pawns, who caught her as was coughing from having the air knocked out of her. They all looked back at Kiba in shock as he looked at his hands, a little surprised at how strong he was. Huh. Kiba started as he gained a calm smirk on his face. I guess Virgil-san's training did show results. This had shocked the group of pawns, as they remember who Virgil was since he was the one who had knocked Riser down and sealed his power. Virgil-san is the one who trained you? Asked Burant, as she was confused about who this person was. Indeed, he also trained everyone else in Buckus Peerage, Kiba said. Wow. Burant said, I mean, we figured he was strong, but to also be able to train all of you must mean he also a very good teacher. Kiba shivered at that as he went slightly pale, getting confused looks from the pawns, as he said, please don't remind me of the training. It may have made us stronger, but it was borderline cruel. Marion, Burant, and Sharia shivered in fear at how strong Virgil sounded and at the training methods he seemed to pick. Kiba noticed the looks of fear, and said, don't worry, I say borderline cruel, but that's just because they seem unorthodox and are difficult, but they do show results. The person who trained them is the same one who knocked you out and sealed Riser Sama's power. Mira finally understood their shock and went wide-eyed herself at that as she remembered waking up and finding herself being taken care of by the other girls in the peerage. She had been surprised to find out that Riser Sama was currently unavailable due to being injured during the meeting. She knew she was the weakest in the peerage, that was very easy to see, but having Riser constantly bring it up was something that had hurt her very much, so when she found out that Riser was being taken care of by his family, giving them time to themselves, she felt happy. Well, I guess I owe it to him to say thank you, Mira said before she saw the sly looks from her fellow peerage members. What? We didn't take you for such a masochist that you'd get off on getting knocked out, Marion said, getting Mira to blush. I meant for technically giving us a 2-week vacation. After all, I don't remember the last time we got a vacation, exclaimed Mira, getting Burant, Marion, and Sharia to nod in agreement. Kiba then cleared his throat, garnering their attention and making them blush in embarrassment at forgetting they were in a rating game. As much as I would enjoy hearing about Riser Sama being in pain from what Naruto-san did to him. At the same time, Akino was flying around the air keeping an eye out for anything suspicious until she sneezed, humming to herself. She said, I feel like I've rubbed off on someone. She then smiled sweetly and said, I hope it was Naruto-sama. Back with Kiba. I do believe we should continue the match, Kiba said as he stood with his sword at the ready. Yes, I believe we should, right girls? Mira asked, getting them to agree. With that, the 4 of them charged at him while Kiba stood at the ready thinking, I wonder what happened to Naruto-san. Back at the park, Clementine slammed into the ground causing a crater to form before she was knocked through a tree, shattering it. There was a flash of light and Clementine shakily looked up as she had a memory flash of a figure wearing exorcist clothes with menacing, glowing blue eyes looking down at her. Suddenly the image went away to reveal Naruto looking down at her with Yamato pointed at her as bits of armor seemed to be vanishing like mist off his body. What are YYUYA aiding FF for? Clementine exclaimed, finish me off. Naruto looked down at her before he turned away and sheathed Yamato as he began walking away and said, I don't think so, it would be a waste to simply kill you after you've improved so much. If you leave me alive, I will come back. I'll gather more people who'll side with me to kill you. Clementine shouted as tears began gathering in her eyes from the emotional pain she was experiencing, which felt sharper than any physical pain she had experienced her entire life. Naruto stopped before slightly turning and said, go ahead, but just remember that their blood will be on your hands. With that, Naruto continued to walk away while Clementine stared at his back. Seeing him walking away brought memories back to a wide-eyed Clementine from when he first left and she couldn't do anything to stop him. Wait. Hearing the shout, Naruto stopped and turned to look at Clementine who had her head down and her eyes shadowed. He fully turned towards her as he noticed her shoulders shaking and was beginning to think it was simply from the pain until he saw her look back up at him with tears in her eyes. Naruto was shocked to see Clementine was crying as he remembered that she was never one for crying. Please, don't leave me behind again, Clementine begged. Not hearing Naruto respond, Clementine continued, please, if I did something to make you leave the first time or I disappointed you somehow, then I am sorry. I am sorry for whatever it is that I did and I am willing to make up for it. Just, please, don't leave me behind again. As Clementine continued to beg for forgiveness and to not be left alone, she never noticed Naruto walking towards her, nor did she hear him due to her crying and sobbing. Eventually, Naruto stood in front of her, before gently cupping her chin, surprising her, and lifted her head so that she was looking at him. She was shocked when she looked at him and saw the gentle smile on his face, as she had never expected such an expression from him. "You did nothing wrong, Clementine," Naruto said. "You were punished for me leaving was something that should have never happened. I had told the church that I wouldn't stay forever as they had originally wanted me to, since I was only there to help train some of the exorcists in training. When they heard this, the church tried forcing me to train specific people, but I refused and threatened to leave immediately if any more actions such as that were attempted. The church, while not happy, conceded and left me alone to do as I pleased." Naruto gained a soft smile as he remembered his time with the church. "I trained you and a small group of other exorcists because I saw the potential you all held. That is why I trained you, because of the great potential you showed, and I believed you and the others could have been the first bridge to making peace between the factions. However, before I could start to show you and the others that not all devils are evil, some enemies I had been avoiding found me again. I had no time to explain anything, so I simply left in the dead of night." Naruto then looked at Clementine with an expression of guilt. "I am sorry for not doing more for you and the others. No doubt they feel the same you do with the way I left, and I will face them just as I have faced you, though maybe a little less seriously than with you," he finished while chuckling at the end. Clementine, who was still pained, looked at Naruto in confusion as she asks, "Why do you want you face them seriously?" "Because," Naruto started, before saying something that shocked Clementine. "You were my best student when compared to the others." Seeing Clementine's shock, Naruto elaborated, "You see, the others all had something that gave them a sort of skill or some type of extra weapon or ability. You, however, didn't have any extra abilities, skills, or weapons, and this made you train harder to make up for it. No weakness, no crutch, no specialties, you were just you, and that was the best thing about you." Clementine was shocked at his words, as he had never given praise before. Hearing him say that she was his best student made her happy, but she was confused about something. However, before she could ask, Naruto moved his now glowing towards her and said, "Now I think that's enough talking for now. Why don't you get some rest?" With that, Clementine's world went dark as she lost consciousness. Naruto then summoned a magic circle underneath Clementine, but before he could teleport her away to someplace safe, he felt a jolt go through his body. Eyes widening, Naruto grunted in pain before fell to his hands and knees, panting heavily while holding his side as he spits up some blood away from Clementine's direction. Naruto looked at the blood and saw what looked to be pieces of black metal rods before he began vomiting up more blood and more metal rods. "Damn it. I forgot how much it hurts and how exhausting it is after using that," Naruto thought to himself as he kept holding his side while he began shaking from the pain he is feeling. Well, what did you expect? Naruto knew exactly who this voice was, so he didn't outwardly react as he thought. "I knew what to expect, Beowulf. I just forgot how painful it was using your balance breaker, since it's not like I can train with it." The one Naruto was communicating with was the spirit within his sacred gear, which didn't have an actual name. So he just called them by the name of the spirit, Beowulf. Beowulf looks like an extremely large wolf with dark gray, almost black fur. However, he has veins of light flowing all around his body while his singular eye glows bright white and a scar is over his other eye. Number 12. Naruto had met Beowulf one day when he was facing a group of powerful devils and was on the verge of being defeated when he awakened his balance breaker. However, while it granted him victory, it caused tremendous amounts of pain due to many of its abilities. Beowulf simply grunted as he responded, "It's not my problem that you're so weak you can't handle it." "Weak?" Naruto mentally shouted. "I'll have you know that I am most certainly not weak." "Whatever you say," Beowulf replied in an uncaring voice before closing the link between them shut. "URG." Naruto grunted as he tried standing but failed and fell again from how weak he felt, struggling to stay conscious. Naruto suddenly felt a presence entering the park and weakly turned to see Graphia looking around frantically before she spotted him. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw how he looked before she ran over to him and placed his head on her lap. "Naruto, are you alright?" Graphia asked, incredibly worried about her student. Naruto weakly looked at Graphia as he said, "I'm fine, just suffering a bit of pain from using my sacred gear." Graphia looked at Naruto like he had too as she shouted, "You're spitting up blood. I don't think that qualifies as fine." Naruto began to chuckle painfully before coughing and turning to the side, spitting up some more blood so as to not get any on Graphia. It was then that Graphia noticed the black metal pieces that were coming out in chunks in Naruto's blood as she asked, "Are you going to be alright?" "I'll be fine," Naruto weakly said, having finally spat out the last of metal rods. I just need to rest now. Graphia nodded her head before saying, all right, I'll take you home now, just tell me where it is. It's the mansion, on the far side of town, Naruto told Graphia, growing even more tired as the exhaustion began to set in. He then weakly lifted his hand that was faintly glowing and said, just look for my energy. Graphia nodded her head and prepared to teleport them before he weakly said, wait, don't forget her. Graphia looked to see the blonde exorcist alive, injured, but alive. Before she could question him, Naruto lost consciousness, leaving a worried Graphia looking at him and the unconscious exorcist before she sighed in frustration and took the unconscious exorcist with them. I better get an explanation soon or I am going to be even harsher to you, Searsex-sama. Graphia thought angrily as she teleported both Naruto and an unconscious Clementine away. Meanwhile, a certain red Satan suddenly began shivering in fear of something but didn't know what. Back at the raiding game, currently, Issei, Asia, Akino, and Rias were moving towards where Riser was, along with his queen and bishop. They had lost Kaneko and Kiba to an explosion that had consumed both of them from Ubeluna, retiring them from the game due to their injuries. Issei had suffered some burns, but luckily those didn't last long thanks to Asia. Right now, Issei had just promoted to queen to try and help out as much as possible against Riser and his two remaining peerage members. Rias then turned to three and said, all right, this is where we put all our training to the test. Let's make Naruto-kun proud and win. The three answered, right. Though Issei looked slightly reluctant when Naruto was brought up, neither Rias, Akino, or Asia noticed as they all then made their way to the roof. Upon reaching the roof, they saw Riser standing there with Ubeluna and Revel nearby. Riser had his usual arrogant smirk on his face, while both Ubeluna and Revel looked to be almost looking for someone before showing very slight disappointment, but nobody had noticed except for Asia as she recognized the looks. So, Riser began with his I am better than thou tone of voice. Has dear Rias decided to give up and surrender to Riser? Rias simply glared before saying, no, I have not, since I have told several times already and I will say it again, that I will not marry you. Riser frowned before saying, it matters not what you want, you and Riser will marry and that will be the end of it. If you need more convincing, then Riser will simply have to finish off the rest of your peerage. Ubeluna, have it. With that, Ubeluna waved her staff towards the Gremory group, releasing a series of explosions, getting them all to jump away or fly away in the cases of Rias and Asia, since Asia was to stay by Rias' side. Akino then launched a bolt of lightning at Ubeluna, who flew up to dodge, along with Riser and Revel, before hearing a shout of, dragon shot. Ubeluna turned to see a beam of red energy heading towards her and quickly tried to dodge but was suddenly prevented when she noticed circles of electricity surrounding her, preventing her from moving. Looking towards Akino, Ubeluna saw her giggling as she said, Thunderwave. Ubeluna then looked at the beam in horror before it collided and caused an explosion. Riser-sama's queen has retired. The four were smiling at each other and glad they had at least managed to eliminate Riser's queen. But before they could do anything else, Issei was hit with a fireball, knocking him towards the edge of the roof. Luckily, he was only suffering from burns due to promoting to a queen, so he wasn't eliminated. HMPH, it looks like this low-class devil actually survived, Riser said while looking at Issei as if he was a piece of trash. Riser then began making another fireball, with this one being bigger than the last, and he held it towards where Issei was still laying on the roof. The burns he was suffering were slowly healing thanks to Asia and her new ability to heal from a distance, but it was still at a slow pace due to how far she was from him. Surrender Rias, Riser said while making the fireball seem even more threatening, or Riser will continue to burn your little pawn. Rias was glaring even harder at Riser when he said that, along with Akino and Asia. Rias then shouted, I will never surrender. Riser simply sneered before saying, so be it, enjoy the funeral of your pawn. With that, Riser launched the fireball at Issei, and Issei could only watch with one open eye as the fireball came closer. Asia, Rias, and Akino all began to rush to try and get to Issei, but they knew they would be too late. Suddenly, Akino felt a pulse of magic and time seemed to stop as she looked to see the grimoire shining. It suddenly opened by itself and went flying through several pages before it stopped on a page with writing that she was unable to understand, but she instinctively knew exactly what it was. Akino then shouted, Raijin no Nagagutsu. A.N. #13. Suddenly time flowed back and everyone continued watching as the fireball drew closer to Issei when there was a sudden flash of light before an explosion from the fireball. Riser was looking at the smoke with an arrogant smirk as he waited for the announcement, but when he didn't hear one, His smirk dropped as he began looking through the smoke to see that Issei was being held over Akino's shoulder. However, something to notice was the rough-looking boots made of lightning that were on her feet and went up to her knees. Everyone was shocked to see this, as no one had ever heard of creating armor out of magic like this. Even Searzek's true form, while similar, wasn't anything like this. Akino put Issei down and immediately collapsed into unconsciousness due to the amount of power she had used from the spell. Rias Sama's queen has retired. With that announcement, Akino vanished like all the others who were retired from the amount of damage they took. This left everyone shocked at Akino performing such a powerful magic spell that it knocked her out of the rating game. However, one person had a different reaction, as she was shocked at how much power one spell was able to exude. One spell caused her speed to increase that much. Rias thought to herself in shock. I mean, I know Naruto said the spells were powerful, but I didn't know they were that powerful. I guess that also explains why she got knocked out after using it. Rias was both shocked and amazed in the power that one spell showed, especially in one who hadn't reached the proper level to use it yet. She was even amazed when she noticed that Akino's grimoire complemented her abilities over lightning-based magic. Looking to the grimoire that she had tethered to her waist from some small chains that seemed to magically connect to her skirt and were wrapped around her grimoire. Her grimoire was a crimson-red color that matched her hair with black wave designs along the spine and cover of the book, while the center of the book had a black sphere that seemed to be absorbing all the designs of the cover. But what about my grimoire? Thought Rias. Was this situation not dire enough to warrant the usage of a spell? Or do I just subconsciously know I'll lose if I use a spell? Rias had several thoughts flowing through her mind, but these were the most prominent. She wanted to know if all the spells were that powerful, or if it was just them not being proficient enough with magic to properly use them. However, she also knew that if she passed out due to using all of her magic and if the spell didn't defeat Riser, then she would lose. However, Rias was broken from her thoughts when she heard Riser say, well, Riser must admit that it was a shock for your queen to have that much power. However, it looks like that was only a one-off, and it is now time for Riser to finish this little charade. With that, Riser made another fireball and launched it where Asia was, shocking everyone to the point that they couldn't react. Suddenly there was an explosion from the fireball, and when the smoke cleared, Asia was nowhere to be seen and only the roof suffered any damage. Issei was distraught, thinking that Asia had been attacked until the announcement came. Rias Sama's bishop has been forfeited. Going wide-eyed, Issei looked at Rias and saw her with her hand extended towards where Asia had been with tears flowing down her eyes. Riser then smirked as he said, Riser is impressed with you, Rias, forfeiting your own bishop, so that she doesn't get hurt. However, all you've done is make it even harder for you to win. Riser then disappeared and held Issei up by his throat, causing Issei to have difficulty breathing as Rias was wide-eyed at Riser's speed. Riser then began squeezing Issei's throat, getting him to gasp and grab at Riser's arm in an attempt to free himself, despite how futile it is. Now, you have a choice. Give up now and your pawn won't have to suffer anymore. Riser then gripped his hand a little harder, getting to gasp even louder due to the lack of air. Riser then said, or continue to fight and watch as your pawn suffers. Issei looked at Rias from the corner of his eye and weakly said, don't do it, bucko. Hearing the pain in Issei's voice, Rias looked conflicted for a moment before she fell to her knees as tears continued flowing from her eyes, and she raised her arm before saying, Rias Gremory, surrender. With that, everything began turning white, overtaking the entire area, and eventually, Rias, Riser, Revel, and Issei as well, teleporting the four out of the area, but not before a final announcement was heard. Thanks for watching.